My name is Nathan. I'm 27 years old, and every year Christmas dinner feels less like a family celebration and more like a stage performance where I'm the punchline. To be fair, I've always been the odd one out. My older brother, Michael, is the golden child, steady job in finance, polished suits, a fiancé my parents adore, and a smile that can charm any room. Then there's me. I took a riskier path, starting a small tech company from scratch instead of taking the safe route they insisted on. The business wasn't flashy at first. It took years of late nights, ramen dinners, and quietly working while everyone else dismissed it as a hobby. And while I've made progress, no one at home ever cared to notice. Christmas has always been a circus of comparisons. From the moment we arrive, Mom fusses over Michael's coat, Dad pulls him into the den to talk business, and I'm left standing in the foyer holding whatever casserole I was assigned to bring, like the side character in my own story. Even as a kid, it was clear where the lines were drawn. Michael got guitar lessons, tutoring, and his own car. I got a handshake when I brought home an A. My family doesn't just play favorites, they broadcast it. And this Christmas? This one hit differently. Dinner had just been served, the table loaded with the usual ham, mashed potatoes, and casseroles. I tried to focus on the food, to just get through the evening without letting their words get under my skin. But halfway through the meal, Mom set her fork down, folded her hands, and turned her eyes directly on me. The room quieted in that strange way where you know something sharp is about to be said. "You'll never be as successful as your brother," she said, her tone flat, like it was a fact she had memorized and repeated countless times in her head. "Stop wasting our time." The words didn't just land, they carved themselves into me. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I felt the heat rise in my chest, my palms clammy against the tablecloth. For a moment, I thought maybe I misheard her. But then it came. Laughter. Not awkward chuckles, not nervous clearing of throats, but actual laughter, rolling from my aunts, cousins, even my dad. "And Michael?" He smirked, sipping his wine as if he'd just won a competition I didn't know we were still playing. I laughed too, but not because it was funny. More because if I didn't laugh, I wasn't sure if I'd snap right there in front of them. It wasn't the first time they dismissed me, but it was the first time they'd done it so openly, so viciously, with everyone joining in. That sting of humiliation felt different. It felt permanent. I forced my smile, staring at my plate, but inside I could feel something twisting, something shifting. I wasn't going to argue. Not there, not in front of them all. That's what they wanted. A scene, another reason to call me dramatic or sensitive. No, I stayed quiet. I let them laugh. But I couldn't stop thinking about what was waiting after midnight, when the house would be silent and their smug faces wouldn't be around to see what I had been building all this time. Because while they saw me as the family failure, what they didn't know was that for the past year, something very big had been set in motion. Something none of them could mock away. And this Christmas, of all nights, was the turning point. That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to just endure their disrespect anymore. I was going to change the entire conversation. And by the time the clock struck midnight, everything they thought they knew about me, about who I was, would be shattered. I sat there at the table, quietly chewing my food as the laughter around me finally died down. On the surface, the conversation drifted back to safer topics. Michael's upcoming promotion, his wedding plans, his investment strategies. But under the table, my leg bounced like it was ready to run a marathon. It wasn't just the comment itself, it was how normal it felt to everyone else. No one flinched, no one defended me, no one even hesitated. In my family's eyes, I had already been cast into the role of less than. Michael leaned back in his chair, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You know, Mom, you're right. Success is about discipline. Nathan just doesn't have that in him. I mean, how many times have you tried to explain that a job is better than chasing some idea?" I caught Dad nodding approvingly, his lips tugging upward into that smirk he always wore whenever Michael talked like this. Exactly. Stability is the mark of a man, not these startup dreams. Startup dreams. The way he said it, like I was some teenager pitching apps in a garage instead of someone who had built a team of 12 employees, secured contracts with actual clients, and tripled revenue in the last year alone. Of course, they didn't know any of that. They never asked. The table buzzed with stories about Michael. How he closed on a condo last month, how he treated everyone to dinner at a steakhouse, how he managed to talk down the price of his engagement ring because he knows how to negotiate. Every story was another brick on the pedestal they built for him, a pedestal I had never been allowed to climb. Then came the little digs, the kind that almost sounded harmless if you weren't paying attention. My aunt leaned across the table with a smile. "Nathan, dear, do you still live in that, what do you call it? That tiny apartment downtown? Oh, you must be so cramped." Before I could even answer, Mom chimed in. "He doesn't mind. He's always been adaptable. He makes do with less." Her tone had that saccharine sweetness, but the words dripped with condescension. I forced a tight smile. "It's not bad. The view's good." Michael grinned. "Yeah, the view of the parking lot." He said it lightly, and the table erupted again, forks clinking against plates as the laughter circled back to me. What made it worse wasn't just the jokes, it was how coordinated it felt. Every time I tried to contribute something, the conversation would pivot back to Michael, like he was the sun and the rest of us were orbiting. When I mentioned I had been working long hours recently, Dad interrupted me mid-sentence to ask Michael about his bonus. When I brought up a trip I was planning with friends, Mom sighed and said, "Maybe you should be saving that money for something useful, like your future." My future, as if I didn't have one. The tension in my chest grew heavier with every dismissal. It wasn't new. This dynamic had existed for years, but something about tonight made it sharper, harder to swallow. Maybe it was the directness of Mom's comment earlier. Maybe it was the way no one blinked before laughing at me. Or maybe it was because I had something they couldn't see, something they assumed I'd never have. Dessert came out. Pumpkin pie, Michael's favorite, and Mom made a big show of slicing him the largest piece. "For my successful son," she said with a proud smile. Then she glanced at me, sliding over a sliver so small it looked like a mistake. "And for Nathan." I wasn't sure if she realized what she was doing, but the symbolism wasn't lost on me. Michael gets abundance. I get scraps. Always. When everyone was settled with their pie, Dad clinked his glass for attention. "I want to make a toast," he said, rising slightly from his chair. His voice boomed with the authority he always carried. "To Michael, to his future, to his marriage, his career, and the man he's become. You've made us proud." Everyone raised their glasses. Mine stayed rooted to the table. No one noticed. As the toast echoed around the room, I sat in silence, staring into my pie. The sweetness tasted like ash in my mouth. I wasn't jealous, not in the way they thought I should be. I was angry. Angry that years of effort, sacrifice, and grit had been reduced to a running joke. Angry that no matter how much I built, they wouldn't look at me without seeing failure. But most of all, I was tired. Tired of being the easy target. Tired of letting them dictate who I was. And while they clinked glasses and celebrated Michael's brilliance, I quietly decided I was going to change the script. Because in just a few hours, after midnight, I'd finally have the chance to remind them that the son they wrote off, the one they dismissed, mocked, and humiliated, wasn't the weak link in this family. I was something else entirely. Dinner stretched into the late evening, the kind of lingering family event where the air feels heavier with each passing minute. The laughter had died down into small conversations, my uncle debating politics with my dad, cousins huddled around their phones showing each other videos, and Michael in the center of it all, holding court like a king among his loyal subjects. I stayed mostly quiet, trying not to let the sting of the earlier comments burrow too deep, but it was like being trapped in a room where every breath you took reminded you that you didn't belong. I had just stood up to clear my plate when Michael's fiancée, Rachel, called out from the other side of the table. "Hey, Nathan, I saw your company's website the other day." For a split second, I felt my chest lift, thinking maybe, just maybe, someone had noticed. "Really?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended, almost betraying how badly I wanted to be recognized. Rachel smiled politely, though it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, I was looking it up because Michael was showing me. You know, just to see what you were working on." "But," she hesitated, glancing toward Michael before continuing. "It looks small. I mean, it's cute. But do people really pay for that kind of thing?" The room chuckled, and Michael leaned back in his chair with a satisfied grin. "I told her you've been experimenting. Like a hobbyist. It's fine, Nat. We all need side projects." Side projects. That word burned hotter than fire. My company wasn't a side project. It was years of sweat, of sacrifice, of clawing through doubt and setbacks. It paid my bills. It supported employees who believed in me. And here he was, reducing it to something on par with a stamp collection. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing myself not to lash out. But the worst was yet to come. A little later, while I was helping stack plates in the kitchen, I overheard Mom and Dad speaking with Michael in the den. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I was just passing through the hallway, but their voices carried. "Look, your brother means well," Dad was saying, his tone low but firm. "But he's not stable. He's not reliable. That business of his could collapse any day," Mom added, "which is why we've been talking. When the time comes, if something happens to us, we want you to be the one to manage the estate. Not Nathan. He'd just waste it. You know how he is." I froze, my hand gripping the edge of the doorway. Estate? My chest went tight. They weren't just dismissing me at the dinner table anymore. They were planning to erase me entirely from the family's future. Michael's reply was like a knife. "Don't worry, I'll take care of it. He doesn't need to know. He'll be fine on his own." They all laughed softly, like it was a secret agreement. I stood there in silence, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just about Michael being the favorite anymore. It was about them actively deciding I wasn't worthy. Not of trust, not of inheritance, not of family legacy. They were cutting me out behind closed doors, and if I hadn't overheard, I would have never known until it was too late. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The voices in the den blurred into static, my vision tunneling. That was the breaking point, the betrayal I hadn't prepared for. I always thought their dismissiveness was just ignorance, that maybe one day they'd realize I wasn't the screw-up they thought I was. But this was intentional, calculated. I backed away from the door, my hands trembling. Every laugh, every smirk, every toast to Michael suddenly made sense in a sharper, crueler light. They weren't just humiliating me, they were erasing me. I didn't storm in. I didn't yell. Instead, I slipped upstairs to the guest room where I was staying for the night. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the darkened window, and I let the weight of it all sink in. The humiliation, the betrayal, the years of being told I'd never measure up. It was all boiling now, condensing into something stronger than anger. I whispered to myself, almost as a vow, "They don't know who I am. Not yet. But they will." Because after midnight, when the world outside that house went still, I would set things in motion that none of them could laugh away. And for the first time that night, I smiled. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the guest room, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the muffled hum of laughter downstairs as the family settled into their post-dinner traditions. Board games, drinks, Michael spinning stories about deals and promotions, my parents soaking up every word like gospel. Meanwhile, I felt hollow, like something inside me had caved in. It wasn't just the humiliation anymore. It was the betrayal I'd overheard. To know that my own parents had already decided I was unworthy of their trust, unworthy of their future, was like a weight pressing on my chest. My entire life, I told myself that if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself enough, maybe they'd see me differently. But no, they'd already made up their minds. In their eyes, I was expendable. I slipped downstairs quietly, hoping to grab a glass of water, but the sight that greeted me in the living room made my stomach sink even further. Michael sat in Dad's recliner, Rachel perched on the armrest. Mom leaned against the fireplace, smiling proudly, while Dad clapped Michael on the shoulder. "We're proud of you, son," Dad said warmly. "You're going to carry this family forward." Rachel smiled sweetly. "And don't worry, I'll make sure everything stays in order." The words weren't meant for me, but they might as well have been daggers. I froze in the hallway, clutching the glass so hard it almost slipped from my hand. I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and walked back upstairs before they noticed me. When I shut the guest room door behind me, something inside me broke. I sank down onto the bed, buried my face in my hands, and let the silence swallow me whole. For the first time in years, I felt small again, like the awkward teenager who could never match Michael's achievements, no matter how hard I tried. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made, the birthdays I skipped to finish work, the relationships that fizzled out because I couldn't afford both a girlfriend and a business, the nights I fell asleep on the office floor, wondering if the gamble I'd taken would ever pay off. All of it, every ounce of effort, had led me here. And still, to my family, I was nothing. For a moment, I let myself imagine walking away completely, cutting them off, disappearing into my work, letting them crown Michael king of the ashes while I lived my own life far from their judgment. It would have been easier, maybe even healthier. But deep down, I knew that walking away wasn't enough. Not after what I'd heard. Because the truth was, it wasn't just about me anymore. They weren't just dismissing my choices. They were dismissing everything I had built, everything my team had poured into our work, everything we had fought to create. To let them erase, that would be to let them win. So, in that dark little guest room, I started to plan. Not out of spite, not even purely out of revenge, but out of necessity. If they weren't going to recognize me willingly, then I'd have to force them to see me for who I really was. I pulled out my laptop, the glow of the screen cutting through the shadows. My company's dashboard lit up. Numbers, contracts, client lists, all the things my family had never cared enough to ask about. I scrolled through the data, reminding myself that I wasn't a failure, no matter what they said. I had something real, something that mattered. And that's when the idea began to form. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. Enough to spark that fire in my chest again. If they wanted to crown Michael as the heir, let them. If they wanted to laugh at me, fine. I'd let them keep laughing. Right up until the moment I turned the lights on and showed them exactly who they had been mocking all these years. But until then, I kept my silence. The next morning, I joined them for breakfast, my face carefully blank, my words measured. They chatted and laughed as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't been gutted the night before. Not one of them noticed how different I felt inside. I didn't correct them. I didn't defend myself. I let them believe I was still the weak one, still the joke of the family. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to fight in the moment. It's to wait, to let your enemies grow comfortable in their arrogance, until the moment comes when you can strike with precision. And as I packed my bag to leave that afternoon, Mom gave me a perfunctory hug. Dad clapped my shoulder without meeting my eyes, and Michael smirked like he'd won something permanent. But I knew better. They thought they'd buried me. They had no idea I was already digging my way out. When I drove away from my parents' house that afternoon, the winter air felt colder than usual, the frost biting against the windshield as if it wanted to remind me how raw the night before had been. But underneath that sting, something inside me had shifted. It wasn't just bitterness anymore. It was fuel. That car ride home was quiet, just me and the hum of the engine. But it felt like the first time in years I was steering towards something greater, something that didn't depend on their approval. Back at my apartment, I slipped inside the cramped space my aunt had called adorably small, with her sugar-coated smirk. And sure, the place was modest. One bedroom, squeaky floors, and a kitchen that could barely hold two people. But when I opened my laptop and signed into my work dashboard, all of that melted away. Because on that screen was proof that my life was not the failure they believed it to be. It was the start of something real. January came with momentum. A contract I'd been chasing for months finally landed, doubling the workload for me and my small but loyal team. I could still remember the excitement in their voices when I announced it during our video call. "This is it," one of them said. "This is the turning point." And it was. Revenue climbed, clients renewed, and for the first time, we weren't just scraping by, we were thriving. I upgraded slowly, carefully. First, I hired 2 more employees, people who believed in the vision even when the hours were long and the rewards not immediate. Then I rented out a proper office space, a modest floor in a building downtown, nothing flashy, but with tall windows that looked out over the city. I still remember unlocking the door for the first time, walking through the empty space, and imagining desks lined with monitors, a hum of conversation, and the quiet rhythm of a team building something that mattered. And the best part? My family had no idea. They still thought I was plugging away at a side project, that I was wasting my potential on something doomed to fail. When they called, they'd ask the same dismissive questions. "Still doing that little business of yours?" Mom would say, her voice dipped in syrupy politeness. Dad would sometimes add, "You know, if it doesn't work out, Michael could probably get you an interview at his firm." I'd smile, keep my voice steady, and say, "Thanks, I'll think about it." Because why correct them now? Let them live in their bubble. As spring rolled in, the contracts kept stacking. By April, we were working with a client so large that signing the deal felt surreal. I sat in my new office after everyone had gone home, staring at the signed agreement on the table, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself breathe. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was success. But success came with choices, and I made mine carefully. Instead of parading my achievements around, I funneled money into investments, diversified, and started setting up safety nets I never thought I'd need. I learned about trusts, LLC protections, and legal shields, things most people in their 20s don't think about. But after hearing my parents plotting to cut me out of the estate, I realized something important. Family can be fickle. Paperwork, however, cannot. So, I built my own protections quietly. My business accounts were airtight, my contracts watertight. And while my family slept easy thinking Michael was their golden ticket, I was weaving a safety net so strong that no one, not even them, could rip it from me. By summer, I had moved out of that cramped apartment. Not into a mansion, not yet, but into a sleek 2-bedroom condo with tall glass windows and a balcony that overlooked the city skyline. It wasn't just about comfort. It was about a daily reminder that I wasn't the person they thought I was. Every morning, I'd sip coffee on that balcony, watching the sunrise over the buildings, and I'd think about how Mom had sliced me that sliver of pie while crowning Michael, her successful son. I thought about Dad's toast. I thought about the laughter. And every time I did, I worked harder. Michael and I still spoke occasionally, though the conversations were always lopsided. He'd brag about his firm, his condo, his expensive vacations. He'd ask about me in that casual, condescending tone, as if checking in on a younger cousin still figuring life out. "So, Nat," he'd say, "you making anything off that little project yet?" I'd chuckle, keeping my voice neutral. "Yeah, it's going okay." And he'd laugh, like I'd just told a joke. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my little project had just surpassed his entire yearly salary. The irony wasn't lost on me. Yet, even as my life grew brighter, I couldn't shake the shadow of what I'd overheard that Christmas night. No matter how far I climbed, the image of my parents whispering to Michael, promising him everything while dismissing me entirely, was burned into my memory. And with each step I took forward, each victory I claimed, the weight of that betrayal only grew heavier. I told myself I was building for me, for my team, for the vision we all believed in. And that was true. But buried underneath, there was another reason. A quieter one. I was waiting for the right moment. Because as much as my family had written me off, as much as they had erased me, I knew there would come a day when they couldn't ignore me anymore. And when that day came, they wouldn't be laughing. Autumn crept in, and with it came the kind of shift that doesn't announce itself with fireworks, but changes everything all the same. By September, my company wasn't just stable, it was thriving beyond what I could have imagined 2 years earlier. We'd expanded to a team of 20, landed contracts that made even seasoned firms take notice, and were quietly becoming a name in the industry. The kind of name people in boardrooms whispered about, wondering how we were doing it so fast. I kept my head down, stayed quiet, and let the work speak for itself. But that didn't stop others from noticing. One morning, I opened my inbox to find an email from a major investor, someone whose name I'd seen splashed across tech articles for years. He wanted to meet. My hands shook a little as I read it over again, half convinced I was hallucinating. But when I sat across from him in a sleek downtown office a week later, it was very real. "You've built something impressive," he said, flipping through the report my team had put together. "I think we can scale this further. Much further." That meeting changed everything. Within weeks, we secured an investment that didn't just pad our accounts, it supercharged us. We opened a second office, this one in a neighboring city. I hired a seasoned operations manager, something I dreamed of but never thought we could afford. Suddenly, the future wasn't just promising, it was inevitable. And all the while, my family remained oblivious. The phone calls from Mom and Dad stayed the same, filled with stories of Michael's achievements and the occasional half-hearted question about my project. When I mentioned the new office casually once, Mom laughed softly. "That's nice, honey. Maybe someday you'll get a real job again." I didn't correct her. Not yet. But then, something happened that set the stage for everything. In early October, I got an unexpected call from my aunt, one of the few relatives who had always treated me with kindness, even if she never fully understood what I did. She invited me to lunch, and over soup and sandwiches, she leaned in, lowering her voice. "Your parents have been talking," she said, glancing around like the walls might have ears. "They're updating their estate plans. From what I heard, everything is going to Michael. The house, the savings, even your grandfather's land. I felt the words hit me like a familiar punch, though this time, I didn't flinch. Instead, I just nodded. And, she added, her voice softening, they've been telling people, well, that you don't really have much going on. That Michael is the one to trust. The one who'll take care of the family when they're gone. There it was again. The quiet erasure. The rewriting of who I was. But this time, I had something they didn't know, leverage. Because just a week earlier, my company had finalized a deal with a major client that directly tied into one of Michael's firm's biggest accounts. In fact, the work we were doing would soon intersect with his, only from the opposite side of the table. And if things went the way I expected, my company wouldn't just be participating in that space. We'd be leading it. For the first time, I realized something. Michael's world and mine were no longer separate. They were on a collision course. That night, I sat in my condo, the city lights glittering outside the window, and I couldn't help but laugh, quietly, to myself. For years, my family had told me I'd never catch up to Michael, never measure up, never matter. And yet, here I was, in a position not only to match him, but to surpass him in ways they couldn't even imagine. I started to map things out more deliberately. Not revenge, not yet, but strategy. I tightened my legal protections, built stronger contracts, and consulted with advisors who helped me prepare for expansion. I moved assets quietly into places no one in my family could ever touch, not even by accident. And all the while, I waited, because I knew Christmas was coming again. Another dinner, another stage where they would laugh and dismiss and toast to Michael's greatness. Only this time, the stage would be different. Because this time, I wouldn't just be the forgotten son at the end of the table. I'd be holding the kind of power they couldn't ignore. And when the clock struck midnight again, the quiet foundation I had built in secret would be ready to rise. Christmas came around faster than I expected. It was strange. Last year I had dreaded it. Every mile of the drive to my parents' house filling me with the kind of anxiety you can taste at the back of your throat. But this time, the closer the holiday drew, the calmer I felt. Not because I had forgiven them, no, but because I knew something they didn't. For the first time, I had the upper hand. I arrived at the house in the afternoon, carrying a bottle of wine and a small wrapped box, just like everyone else. The place looked the same, lights strung across the porch, the smell of roasted turkey wafting out the door, my mother's laugh echoing in the foyer as she greeted Michael first, pulling him into a warm hug before she even noticed me behind him. "Oh, Nathan, you're here too," she said, her voice polite but distracted. I smiled faintly. Wouldn't miss it. Dinner unfolded almost like a rerun of last year. Michael bragged about his firm's record profits. Rachel talked about their honeymoon plans, and my parents nodded along, proud and glowing. I was, as usual, the afterthought. When I mentioned the new condo I'd moved into, Dad frowned and said, "Hopefully you're being smart with your money. You don't want to overextend yourself." Michael chuckled and added, "Don't worry, Dad. If he falls, I'll help him out." The table laughed. I stayed quiet. I let them, because I knew what was waiting. Halfway through dessert, as Dad raised his glass to toast Michael's bright future again, I pulled out my phone and set it gently on the table. "Actually," I said, my voice calm, almost casual, "there's something I should probably tell you all." The room quieted. Forks clinked onto plates. Even Michael's smirk faltered a little. I tapped the screen, opening a news article that had gone live just an hour earlier. The headline glared across the top. Local tech firm lands landmark contract, poised to redefine industry standards. Beneath it was a photo of me, standing with my team in front of our new office, smiles wide, confidence clear. "This is me," I said simply, sliding the phone toward them. Mom leaned closer, her brow furrowing. "What is this?" Michael picked up the phone, his eyes darting across the text. His jaw tightened. This can't be right." "It is," I replied. "That little side project you've all been laughing at. That's my company. And as of last week, we closed a deal that not only secures our growth for years, but also intersects with your firm's biggest client." I turned to Michael. "Which means, starting next quarter, you'll be reporting numbers against us." The silence that followed was almost tangible. My dad's hand, mid-toast, froze in the air. My mom blinked rapidly, as if trying to process what she was reading. Rachel's polite smile had vanished. And Michael? He looked like someone had just pulled the rug out from under him. I leaned back in my chair, my voice calm but edged with steel. Funny, isn't it? You've all spent years telling me I'd never measure up, that I was wasting my time, that Michael was the future of this family. And yet here we are. Your so-called failure is sitting at the same table, holding cards you didn't even know existed. No one laughed this time. I didn't gloat, not outright. I didn't raise my voice or slam the table. I let the silence do the work. I let their faces, confused, stunned, even a little fearful, speak volumes. And then, just as casually, I picked up my fork and took another bite of pie. The balance of power had shifted, and they knew it. For a long, heavy moment, no one spoke. The air around the table was thick, as if all the warmth from the Christmas lights had drained out, leaving only the weight of realization pressing down on every face. My mother finally broke the silence, her voice unsteady. "Nathan, why didn't you tell us?" She reached across the table, but the gesture wasn't maternal. It was desperate, like someone grasping for a rope slipping through their fingers. I met her eyes calm. "Because you never asked. Every time I tried to tell you something, you brushed it aside, turned the conversation back to Michael. You didn't want to hear it. And now? Now you don't get to claim it." Her hand faltered, retreating back to her lap. My dad cleared his throat, his tone shifting into the commanding voice he always used when he thought he could control the room. "Son, don't be dramatic. You know we've always wanted what's best for you. If this venture of yours is really growing, then that's good news for all of us. Families share in success." I let out a small laugh, sharp and humorless. Families share support too. Respect. Encouragement. I've been giving without ever receiving. And now you want to claim my success as your own? No. Michael's jaw was tight, his face pale. "You don't understand what you're getting into. If your company overlaps with ours, it won't end well for you. You're playing in a world you don't belong to." "Funny," I said, leaning forward, my voice low but steady. "That's exactly what you told me about life in general. But I do belong here. And now, whether you like it or not, your firm will be competing with mine. Only difference? I've been underestimated my whole life. You have no idea how much I've learned from being the one in the shadows." Rachel shifted uncomfortably, her hand brushing Michael's arm. "Maybe we should talk about this later," she whispered, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Doubt in Michael, doubt in the family narrative they had built around him. The rest of the evening was stiff. Conversation died in the corners, smiles forced and brittle. My parents tried to recover, asking questions with sudden, performative interest. "So, who are your clients? What kind of offices? How many employees?" But their voices were strained, their pride cracked. I answered politely, but sparingly. They weren't owed my details. They had forfeited the right to share in this part of my life. When dessert plates were cleared and people began gathering coats, my father placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezing a little too hard. "You're still my son," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Remember that." I held his gaze. "I am. But you're the ones who forgot it." The drive home felt different this year. The snow on the streets glowed under the streetlights, and for the first time in a long time, I felt light. I had faced them, not with anger or shouting, but with truth, and the truth had cut deeper than any outburst could. The fallout came quickly. In the weeks after Christmas, I heard from my aunt again. My parents had been making frantic calls, trying to figure out how they had missed what I'd been doing, spinning excuses to cover their ignorance. Michael, meanwhile, had gone unusually quiet. Word in his circles was that his firm was uneasy. Competition was coming from an unexpected direction, and he was rattled. But I didn't reach out. I didn't explain. I didn't offer comfort or gloat. I let the silence sit, the same silence they had left me in for years. And for once, I wasn't the punchline. I was the story. That Christmas, my family finally learned a truth they'd spent years laughing away. The son they dismissed, the one they sliced the smallest piece of pie for, the one they wrote out of the future, he was already shaping it. And as I stood on my balcony weeks later, coffee in hand, watching the city lights stretch endlessly before me, I realized something. I didn't need their pride. I didn't need their approval, because I had built something stronger than both. And whether they liked it or not, they would never look at me the same way again. I was never the type to keep score. Not when it came to family, at least. For most of my life, I believed that showing up for people, being generous, quietly dependable, the one who handled things without making a fuss, would be enough. That it would speak for itself. But I've learned something over the past year, and especially during one unforgettable family dinner. Sometimes silence doesn't earn you respect. Sometimes it just makes you invisible. My name's Bryson. I'm 37. I run a small portfolio of businesses, some real estate, a digital marketing agency, and a couple investments in local coffee shops and startups. I wouldn't say I'm wealthy in the private jet sense, but I'm definitely doing well. Well enough that money hasn't been something I've had to worry about in a long time. But here's the thing about family. They don't always see who you've become. They lock you into the version of you they're most comfortable with. The one who left town at 22, who chased the money, who only comes back for holidays and birthdays and sends checks instead of hugs. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania. Middle of nowhere, really. My parents, James and Darlene, are high school sweethearts, very salt-of-the-earth people. My dad worked in a factory his whole life until he got laid off in his late 50s. My mom cleaned houses, sometimes did childcare. We weren't poor, but we were always on the edge of something breaking. I moved out as soon as I could, college first, then jobs in the city, then my own thing. And yeah, I got lucky. I built something. But the more successful I became, the more distant I felt from the people I loved. I always made sure to help out. Quietly. If my parents needed a new fridge, it showed up. When their car died, I just happened to have a client who donated one. When my dad was diagnosed with a heart condition 2 years ago and didn't have great insurance, I told them not to worry. I framed it as, I've got some business write-offs I need to make anyway, like I was doing it for taxes. Truth is, I paid off over $80,000 in medical bills last year without blinking. They never asked, I offered, but I didn't make a big deal out of it. I figured that's what a good son does. You don't tally it up. You don't look for applause. But there's someone in my family who definitely does. My younger brother, Caleb, is 34. He stayed in town, works a regular 9 to 5 at a car dealership, and lives 5 minutes from my parents' place. He's always been the loyal son, the one who mows their lawn, drives them to doctor's appointments, helps around the house. And I don't want to diminish that, it matters. But there's always been this quiet tension between us, like he's measuring himself against me and always coming up short, even when I'm not competing. And instead of talking about it, he lets it seep out in passive-aggressive jabs. He makes these comments that sting more than they should. And for the longest time, I let them slide because I didn't want to cause waves. I thought, maybe I deserve it for leaving. Then came the anniversary dinner. My parents hit 40 years of marriage this past summer. Caleb organized a big dinner at this rustic local venue that used to be a barn and now serves overpriced steak and potatoes with craft beer. It was beautiful, fairy lights, vintage tableware, the whole thing. He did a great job putting it together, and I told him so. I even helped cover the cost. Not that anyone knew. I Venmo'd him a chunk without asking for recognition, just wanted to support. My girlfriend, Elise, came with me. We've been dating for a couple years now. She's poised, kind, sharp, and immediately clocked the weird energy the second we walked in. You know that feeling when you enter a room and everyone's already decided how they feel about you? Yeah, it was like that. We sat at a long table with about 25 family and friends, cousins, aunts, some old neighbors, my parents' church friends. It started out lovely. Everyone was chatting, laughing. Then it came time for the toast. Caleb stood up first. He gave a heartfelt little speech about how our parents' love was a beacon of stability in his life, how he learned what commitment looked like by watching them. It was sweet. Everyone clapped. My mom wiped her eyes. Then my dad nodded at me and said, Bryson, you want to say something? I hadn't planned on it, but I stood. I kept it simple. I raised my glass and said, to Mom and Dad, for teaching us love, sacrifice, and the kind of hard work that builds not just a life, but a legacy. I wouldn't be the man I am today without you both. I looked at them as I said it, and for a moment, my dad smiled like he meant it. Then Caleb laughed. Just one of those sharp exhales through the nose, like he couldn't help himself. I glanced over. He shook his head and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, you mean everything I did while you ran off to play rich businessman? The laughter around the table started small, nervous, but it grew. My dad actually chuckled. My mom gave Caleb a light shove on the arm like he was just being cheeky. My aunt snorted into her wine. I forced a tight smile, raised my glass again, and sat down, heart thudding against my ribs like a warning drum. Elise didn't laugh. She reached under the table and touched my knee, just once, like she was anchoring me. I didn't say anything. Not then. Not when Caleb made another joke later about me probably writing off the dinner as a business expense. Not when my dad called him the real MVP of the family for always being there. Not even when I caught my mom glancing at me like I was a guest instead of her firstborn son. But something cracked that night, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. It wasn't just the disrespect, it was how easy it was for them to laugh at me. How easily my quiet contributions had been erased. I'd never asked for recognition, but I'd assumed, deep down, that it would come. That the truth mattered. But maybe the truth only matters if you speak it. That night, I didn't sleep. Elise curled up beside me at the hotel, her breathing soft and steady, and I just lay there staring at the ceiling. Running through every moment over the last 10 years. Every bill I covered, every flight I booked, every time I dropped everything to come home for them. And how none of it seemed to matter because I didn't wave it around like a flag. The next morning, over black coffee and cold eggs, Elise said gently, "I know that look. What are you thinking?" And I said, "I'm done letting them rewrite the story." Because in my briefcase, in the back seat of my car, was a folder I'd brought with me by chance. Inside were the receipts. Literal and metaphorical. Copies of the paid invoices from my dad's cardiologist and hospital. The email exchanges with the billing office. The bank wires. I hadn't planned on showing them. I never planned on showing them. But that was before the toast. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that sometimes the only way to get people to see you is to make them look. So I waited. I waited until the second half of the dinner, after dessert, when people were starting to stand, stretch, and mingle. I waited until my mom tapped her glass and said, "Before everyone goes, just one last thank you for coming tonight and helping us celebrate. We're so proud of our boys." And then I stood. I took out the folder. And I said, "I have something I'd like to add." And just like that, every eye in the room turned to me. And none of them had any idea what was about to happen. The room went quiet, the way a room does when someone stands who isn't supposed to. Not angry quiet, confused quiet. A couple cousins half laughed, assuming I was going to make a toast or crack a late joke. My dad blinked at me like he'd forgotten I was still here. My mom's smile was frozen in place, somewhere between polite and nervous. Caleb leaned back in his chair with that smug, lazy slouch of his, arms folded, already smirking. And me? My hands were shaking. Not visibly, not enough for anyone to notice unless they were really watching, but I could feel it. That slight tremble just beneath the skin. I've spoken in front of boardrooms filled with people wearing suits that cost more than my childhood home. But standing there in that rustic venue in front of people who had known me since diapers? That took a different kind of courage. I wasn't planning to say anything. I began, my voice steady but quieter than usual. And I certainly didn't bring this to make a scene. But I think, maybe it's time we put a few things on the table. A few people chuckled nervously. My mom tilted her head, confused. My dad's brow furrowed. Caleb didn't move. I placed the folder gently on the table in front of me and opened it. Inside were a few sheets of paper, just a few. I'd picked them carefully. The summary of the hospital charges, the final invoice showing a zero balance, the wire transfer confirmation from my business account, and the thank you email from the hospital administrator. "I want to tell you all a quick story," I said, glancing at the papers but not reading from them. "Last year, when Dad's heart condition worsened, there were a lot of bills. Some of you know how expensive it can get. Surgeries, follow-ups, prescriptions. And because of some gaps in insurance coverage and timing issues, a lot of that landed squarely on their shoulders." My mom shifted in her seat. My dad's face turned a shade redder. Caleb scoffed audibly and said under his breath, "Oh boy, here we go." I ignored him. I didn't want them to stress about it. I didn't want them to have to choose between treatment and peace of mind. So I stepped in. Quietly. Privately. I called the billing office. I worked with the hospital. I paid the entire balance off. Over $80,000. A silence felt like someone had sucked the air out of the room. My mom's mouth parted. My dad opened his to speak, but didn't. And I never brought it up, I continued. Because I didn't want credit. I just wanted Dad to be okay. I wanted our family to be okay. Caleb stood. "Wow," he said, clapping once, sarcastic and slow. "So this is your big moment, huh? You want applause? A statue in the backyard? You couldn't just let us have one night." My jaw tensed. I stared at him hard. "I didn't bring this up to one-up you, Caleb," I said. "But you made it personal. When you joked during the toast that I ran off to play rich businessman, while you did all the real work. You made it sound like I abandoned the family, like I've just been writing checks and disappearing. He threw his hands up. You did disappear, Bryson. You don't call. You don't show up unless it's convenient. You send gifts like it's supposed to mean something. Meanwhile, I'm the one who changes the light bulbs. I'm the one who drives them to their appointments. My dad interjected then. All right, that's enough. This is not the place. No, Dad, I said, sharper than I meant to. Maybe this is exactly the place. Because for years, I've watched this narrative take shape, that I'm the selfish one, the absent one, while Caleb's the hero for sticking around. And I've let it happen. I let it happen because I thought it didn't matter. I thought the truth would win out eventually. But it hasn't. My voice cracked on that last word, and I felt my throat tighten. I didn't disappear, I said, softer now. I just stopped trying to prove myself to people who had already made up their minds about me. A few of my cousins looked away, uncomfortable. Elise sat still, her face calm but unreadable. My Aunt Karen whispered something to the woman beside her. I've flown across the country on 2 days' notice because Mom had the flu and needed help. I've helped with house repairs, quietly, through contractors I hired. I've covered costs you don't even know about, because I didn't want anyone to feel embarrassed. But no matter what I do, Caleb gets the hugs, and I get the suspicion. My mom finally spoke. Bryson, honey, that's not fair. No. What's not fair, I interrupted, is being treated like a stranger who just shows up to drop money on the table and leave. I love you both. But tonight, I watched as everyone laughed at me, including you, Dad. And I realized, I've been giving without being seen. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one moved. No one breathed. Caleb broke it, of course. So what? You want us to beg for forgiveness? You want a medal? You think just because you paid some bills, that makes up for not being around. I looked at him, long and hard. I think it's interesting that you're so quick to dismiss what I've done. Maybe because if people knew the full picture, you wouldn't be the only one wearing the crown. Caleb's jaw twitched. You've got no idea what it's like being here every day, dealing with their stubbornness, their moods. You fly in, play savior, and fly out. And you think I don't carry the weight in other ways? I asked. You think just because I'm not here physically that it means I don't worry about them? That I don't stay up at night wondering if I've done enough? I've built a life where I can help them. And I have helped them. But all anyone sees is what's convenient. My dad stood then, clearing his throat. All right, that's enough from both of you. No, I said more quietly now. It's not enough. Because I need to know, when Caleb made that joke during the toast and everyone laughed, including you, did you think it was true? He paused. Looked at me. His mouth opened, closed. And then he said the one thing I didn't expect. I think it felt true. That broke something in me. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. But something shifted inside, like a gear grinding out of place, never to return. I nodded slowly, more to myself than to anyone else. Right, I said. Okay. Bryson, my mom said, her voice suddenly gentle. That's not what he meant. No, Mom. That's exactly what he meant. And that's okay. At least now I know where I stand. I collected the folder and closed it. Elise stood beside me, placing a hand on my back, and I realized then that I'd been gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles were white. I'll be leaving in the morning, I said. Didn't want to make this trip about me, but I won't apologize for finally telling the truth. And just like that, I stepped away from the table. My legs were heavy, but my chest was lighter. I walked past my cousins, past the neighbors, past my dad who didn't meet my eyes. Caleb muttered something I couldn't hear. My mom called my name once, but I didn't stop. We got in the car. Elise buckled her seatbelt without a word. We drove in silence for a while, the sound of gravel crunching beneath the tires. Finally, she reached over, gently took my hand, and said, "You did the right thing." "I don't know," I replied. "I feel like I just lit a match in a dry forest." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe you finally burned down a lie that needed to go." The next day, I didn't say goodbye. I checked out of the hotel early, left a note at the front desk for my parents. Just a short message. I'm still your son, but I won't be your scapegoat. And I meant it. But the fallout hadn't even started yet. Because 2 days later, I got a phone call that changed everything. And that's when the real betrayal hit, one I never saw coming. For the first 3 days after I left, the phone didn't ring. No missed calls. No texts. No, "Where did you go?" Or "Can we talk?" Not from my mom, not from my dad. Certainly not from Caleb. And I know what you might be thinking. Why would I expect anything different after what happened at the dinner? But the truth is, some small part of me, some rusted, childhood part, still hoped that maybe my parents would reach out. Not to apologize, necessarily. Just to acknowledge me. To say, we heard you. To ask if I was okay. But they didn't. The first call came from my Aunt Karen. Mid-morning. I was in my apartment back in Chicago, sipping burnt espresso and pretending to answer emails while my mind played reruns of that night on loop. I just thought you should know, she said, her voice low and wary. Caleb's been going around saying you threatened the family at the dinner. That you tried to blackmail your parents with money. I blinked. What? He said you brought some folder, waved it around, and said if they didn't start appreciating you, you'd cut them off. That you've been holding money over their heads for years. A few people already believe him. I didn't speak for a moment. My mind couldn't wrap around it. That's not what happened, I finally said. I know. I was there. But you should know. He's getting ahead of the story. And your parents haven't said a word. Of course they hadn't. Thanks, Karen, I murmured. She hesitated. Just be careful. You know how this family works. Oh, I did. I just let myself forget. That call was the beginning of a long, quiet unraveling. Over the next week, I started seeing the ripple effects. My cousin Leah, who used to like every one of my Instagram posts, unfollowed me. A few old family friends stopped responding to texts. One of my mom's neighbors, a woman I'd once paid 6 months' rent for after her husband passed, left a passive-aggressive comment on my business Facebook page about narcissistic sons who think money fixes everything. It hit me harder than I expected, not because I needed validation from them, but because I'd built this fragile illusion in my head that the truth would eventually speak for itself, that people would see through Caleb's resentment, that my parents would stand up and clarify things. Instead, they stayed silent. And Caleb? He doubled down. I started getting tagged in subtweets from his friends, thinly veiled jabs about family members who abandon their roots, and money guys who think they can buy loyalty. One of his Facebook posts read, "At least I'm not the kind of son who needs to carry around a folder to prove he's worth something." That one got 100 likes. My dad even commented, "Proud of you, son." And that was the real gut punch. I didn't eat much that week. Elise noticed. She cooked dinners I barely touched, sat with me in silence, rubbed my back when I couldn't sleep. She didn't push, just let me feel it. I remember one night, I was staring at the ceiling again, that same cold emptiness I'd felt in the hotel crawling back under my skin, and I said quietly, "What if they were right? What if I really did run off and forget them?" She turned toward me, eyes wide with disbelief. "Bryson, no, you didn't forget them. You made your own life. You built something, and you never stopped showing up for them. They just didn't want to see it unless it looked like what they expected. But maybe I should have just kept paying and stayed quiet." She sat up then. "Let me ask you something. If a friend treated you like this, dismissed your help, laughed at your pain, lied about you, would you still show up for them?" I didn't answer. She reached for my hand. "You're allowed to expect more from the people who say they love you." I nodded slowly, but inside, I still felt hollow. The next morning, I woke up to an email from my dad. No subject line, just 4 words. "Let it go, Bryson." That was it. No greeting, no explanation, no acknowledgement of what happened. Just those words. And for a while, I almost listened. I stopped answering calls from extended family. I removed a couple relatives from my company's holiday gifting list. I threw the folder, the one with the medical receipts, into a drawer I didn't plan to open again. I even ghosted Aunt Karen's follow-up message, because I didn't know how to respond without sounding bitter. I kept working. That was the one place where things still made sense. My company was launching a new client platform, and I poured myself into it. I ran 10 Zoom meetings a day, nodded at every milestone, checked every deliverable box. But it was all mechanical. Like I was playing the part of Bryson the CEO, while the real me waited somewhere behind a locked door. One night, Elise came home with 2 cups of hot chocolate and found me still at my laptop, staring at the same blank slide for 2 hours. "This isn't sustainable," she said softly. I rubbed my eyes. "It's fine. I'm just tired." She sat beside me, handed me a cup. "You're allowed to grieve, you know." I didn't respond, but something in me cracked then. I set the laptop aside, leaned into her shoulder, and finally let myself feel everything I'd been avoiding. The anger, the shame, The ache of being misunderstood by the people who raised me. It didn't solve anything, but it was a start. The next morning, I pulled out a notebook and wrote one sentence across the top of the page. Who am I outside of them? It sounds dramatic, I know, but I realized that so much of my life, so much of my success, had been quietly driven by a need to prove something, to earn approval, to be seen. And now that I'd hit a wall with my family, I was finally forced to confront the deeper truth. I'd built a life to be impressive, not necessarily fulfilling. So I started making changes. Small ones, at first. I restructured my schedule to include time for actual hobbies, not just productive activities. I picked up woodworking again, something I hadn't done since college. I started going on longer walks without my phone. I reached out to an old mentor from my early startup days just to catch up, and ended up reconnecting with a few people who reminded me of who I was before I started performing for everyone else. I also launched a passion project that had been sitting in my drafts folder for years, a nonprofit mentoring program for small-town high school students interested in entrepreneurship. I named it after my grandfather, the only man in our family who ever told me I could do anything. Within a few weeks, we had our first cohort of 10 kids. One of them, a 17-year-old girl named Marissa, asked me during a Zoom session, "How did you know you wanted to be successful?" And I said, before even thinking, I didn't. I just wanted to be loved. The words hung there for a second, and then I laughed, not bitterly, but with a kind of surprised relief. Because it was true, and I wasn't ashamed of it anymore. A few weeks later, Elise and I went on a trip to Portland for her friend's wedding. It was rainy, cold, and absolutely beautiful. I left my phone in airplane mode for 3 days. Didn't check emails. Didn't think about Caleb. Didn't even dream about the anniversary dinner. For the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't replaying old wounds. I was just present. I started sleeping better, eating better, laughing more. And somewhere in the middle of that slow rebuild, something interesting happened. I started getting messages. Not from Caleb, not from my parents, but from their friends. My dad's old coworker reached out on LinkedIn. "Hey, just wanted to say, heard what you did for your parents. That was incredibly generous. Don't let anyone twist it." A neighbor emailed me to say her husband had recently been diagnosed with the same heart condition, and she wanted to thank me for advocating for better billing transparency. Even a cousin who had been cold to me after the dinner sent a DM. "I'm sorry for judging you. I didn't know the full story. It wasn't a flood, just a trickle. But it was enough to remind me that truth doesn't always echo in the loudest room. It travels quietly, person to person, and eventually lands where it's meant to." Still, I kept my distance. I wasn't ready to go back. Not yet. But then something happened that dragged me right back into the middle of it. Late one night, around 11 p.m., I got a text from my mom. Just one sentence. "I need to tell you something before it's too late." I stared at it for a long time. And before I could even reply, another message came through. "Your name was removed from the will. Caleb said you told us to go F ourselves. Your father signed the papers last week." I didn't move. I just sat there, frozen, the phone glowing in my hand like a fuse that had just been lit. I read the message 3 times, then a 4th. Then I set the phone down on the counter, walked to the sink, and poured myself a glass of water, trying to slow the sudden rush of blood in my ears. The apartment was dark except for the under-cabinet light above the stove. Elise was already asleep in our room, her book resting open on her chest. I just stood there in the kitchen, gripping the counter with one hand, glass in the other, trying to process the fact that my father, my own father, had signed a legal document that erased me from his legacy. Removed from the will. Because Caleb said I told them to go screw themselves. I hadn't. I would never. But in their silence, in their willingness to be manipulated, the effect was the same. I finally picked up the phone again and replied. "What are you talking about?" When? No answer. I watched the little typing bubble flicker for a few seconds. Then it disappeared. Then nothing. I didn't sleep that night. I barely moved. My mind was cycling through every emotion it knew. Rage, disbelief, sadness, confusion, and finally landed on a single, sobering clarity. I had spent my whole adult life giving this family the benefit of the doubt, hoping they'd see my worth on their own, hoping the truth would rise through the cracks like sunlight through broken blinds. But people don't see the truth when someone's already handed them a more convenient story. And now they were writing me out of it entirely. I didn't care about the inheritance. Not really. I had my own success. I didn't need my dad's money or property or pension, but it was what it meant. What it said, that after everything I'd done, everything I didn't say, every sacrifice I never paraded, they were willing to cut me out based on a lie. And I knew exactly whose lie it was. The next morning, I called my attorney. "Hey, Patrick," I said, calm but cold. "You remember that family trust review we talked about a few years ago? Of course, you decided not to move forward with it at the time." "Well," I said, "I changed my mind. See, there's something Caleb never understood about me. He thought I was just the guy who threw money at problems and expected applause. But I don't throw anything. I place. Intentionally. Strategically. I build. I map. I invest. And when I play the long game, I win." Back in 2019, during one of my rare visits home, my dad offhandedly mentioned he was worried about his assets. Said something about taxes eating away at the house he'd spent his life paying off. I offered to help, naturally, but he waved me off like he always did when anything smelled remotely like financial advice. That was one of our oldest dynamics. He hated feeling like I knew more than him. So instead, I asked around, dug into the local zoning laws, talked to a buddy in property law, and I learned something interesting. Their home, the one Caleb was so eager to inherit, was sitting on a corner lot zoned for small business development. Not particularly exciting, unless you knew the city had just approved a nearby shopping center expansion that would double foot traffic on their street, which meant that the dusty, three-bedroom ranch house my dad considered his modest retirement asset. It was sitting on land that would soon be worth millions to the right buyer. I hadn't said anything at the time. I'd filed it away because, again, I wasn't playing to win back then. I was just trying to be a good son. But now I had a reason to play. I called Patrick and explained the situation, briefly, without emotion. I told him about the property, the rezoning, the expected value spike. Then I told him about the removal from the will, about Caleb's lies, and what I wanted to do next. "Can we legally contest the amendment to the will?" I asked. "Potentially," he said, "but it depends on the jurisdiction and how it was filed. We'd need to show undue influence, fraud, or mental incapacity." "What about land acquisition?" I asked. "If I wanted to purchase the lot from a future owner, assuming Caleb ends up with it, can I do that privately?" "Sure, but why wait?" he asked. "If the land is going to skyrocket in value, why not find a legal pathway to get it now?" And that's when it clicked. I didn't need to wait. I just needed to get creative. Over the next 6 weeks, I laid the groundwork. Step 1 was simple. I reached out to the city planning office under a different name, technically a shell company I already owned, and requested zoning documents for all properties in that district. I framed it as early research for a potential coffee shop franchise. Nothing suspicious, just due diligence. The documents came back, and sure enough, the city was planning to build a new municipal parking structure 2 blocks from my parents' home. That alone would double the land value. Within a year, any developer with sense would be bidding for the surrounding properties. Step 2. I created a second company, completely unaffiliated with me on paper, and hired a local real estate scout to start making low-level inquiries on nearby lots. This wasn't about buying yet. This was about stirring interest, planting the idea that something big was coming. Developers talk. Rumors grow. I needed Caleb to feel the heat. Step 3. I reached out to a trusted appraiser and asked him to quietly value the property, based not on the house, but on the lot's potential. The number he came back with made me whistle. "Any idea who else has this information?" I asked him. "Not yet, but it won't be a secret for long." Good. That was the point. Step 4 was personal. I called Aunt Karen. "Listen," I said, "you were the only one who warned me. I owe you some truth in return." And I told her everything. The medical bills, the folder, the will, the lies. She listened without interrupting, and when I was done, she exhaled so loudly it rattled through the speaker. "I knew something was off," she said. "Caleb's been acting like he already owns the place." "He might think he does," I said, "but I'm not done yet." Then I asked her a favor. I didn't want her to lie, just to tell a story, one I knew would make its way back to Caleb, about a mysterious company quietly making offers on all the properties along Chestnut Avenue, and how someone overheard that the land might be worth triple its appraisal soon. She agreed. She even smiled. "You've always been more your grandfather than your dad," she said. "He would have loved this." Within a month, Caleb reached out. For the first time since the dinner. His number lit up my phone while I was sitting in a meeting. I stared at it. Let it ring out. He tried again that night. Left a voicemail. Hey, just checking in. Heard some stuff about the neighborhood. Thought maybe you'd know something. I didn't reply. 2 days later, my mom texted. Did you tell someone to make an offer on our house? I ignored it. Because the truth is, I didn't need to do anything else. Caleb was already unraveling. The rumors worked. The market was shifting. And now the property he'd fought so hard to inherit was about to become a liability. Because if he didn't act fast, someone else would. Someone like me. But I wasn't after the land. Not yet. I was after something bigger. Something louder. And the perfect opportunity was just around the corner. See, every spring, our family does a reunion picnic at Memorial Park. My mom organizes it. My dad grills. Caleb usually brings the speakers and plays old playlists that haven't been updated since 2012. This year was different. This year, I RSVP'd. And I brought the guest of honor. My lawyer. The morning of the family picnic, Memorial Park was already buzzing by the time Elise and I arrived. Kids running between the barbecue pits. Coolers cracking open. Folding chairs arranged in lopsided semicircles. The same faded James and Darlene family reunion. Banner fluttered from the same tree it had every year since 2003. It was a scene I knew too well. Warm, familiar, and this time, completely unaware that the air was carrying something else with it. A storm. Not loud. Not fast. But precise. I hadn't been to one of these since before the pandemic. Part of me expected whispers, side eyes, maybe even someone telling me I wasn't welcome after everything that had gone down. But when we walked up, everyone smiled. Offered food. Nodded politely. Some even hugged me. Because that's the thing about rumors. They only work until the truth walks in wearing a tailored jacket and mirrored sunglasses. Elise and I set up near one of the shaded tables, nodding to relatives as we passed. She looked incredible, as always. Calm, poised, knowing exactly what this day meant to me. And right beside us, in a casual navy button-up and jeans, was someone most of the family had never met before. Patrick Weiss, attorney, strategist, and the quiet engine behind what was about to unfold. Do we expect fireworks? He asked me under his breath, watching Caleb lug a cooler across the grass. No, I said, popping open a soda. We expect clarity. It didn't take long for the vultures to circle. Within 15 minutes, Caleb had already made a beeline to our table. Bryson, he said with a tight smile, looking between me and Patrick. Didn't expect to see you here. Especially not with company. Nice to see you too, Caleb, I said. This is Patrick. He's here on business. Elise sipped her lemonade and didn't say a word. Caleb raised an eyebrow. Business? At a family picnic? I figured, if everyone's going to keep confusing money with malice, I might as well bring someone who knows the difference. His smile twitched, just a little. You've always had a flair for drama. And you've always had a habit of lying to people who trust you, I replied. He stiffened, then chuckled. So what is this, some kind of ambush? You gonna pass out spreadsheets again? I smiled politely. No need. I'm not here to prove anything to you. Then I stood up and said loudly. But I am here to clarify a few things. The music kept playing. Kids kept running. But a few heads turned. Aunt Karen definitely heard me. So did Uncle Phil and Cousin Leah. Caleb raised his hands like he was being arrested. Oh boy, here we go again. I ignored him. I'd like to say something, I said louder now. Just real quick. Not a speech. A clarification. That got their attention. My mom looked up from the grill, startled. My dad paused mid-flip of a burger. Elise touched my elbow lightly, signaling I had the floor and the support. Some of you know there's been tension lately. Misunderstandings. And that's fine. Families are messy. But I want to be transparent about what's really been going on, especially before things spiral even further. Patrick stepped up beside me, calm and professional. Last year, I said, my brother told my parents I threatened them, that I used my financial help to manipulate them. Based on that lie, I was removed from their will. A few gasps. My mom looked down. My dad stared stone-faced. I didn't find out until after the fact, through a text, and I chose to walk away. Caleb was fuming now, red-faced, shifting on his feet. No one wants to hear this. I'm not asking, I said, turning to him. I'm stating, because you spent months poisoning people's opinions of me, and now they deserve the truth. He opened his mouth, but Patrick stepped forward and said, We're happy to provide documentation, including hospital billing records, correspondence, and bank statements proving Mr. Bryson covered over $80,000 of medical debt anonymously and without conditions. He did not, at any point, threaten to withhold support. What he did was step back after being mocked, disrespected, and deliberately cut out of a legacy he helped secure. Silence. You could hear the wind through the trees. But that's not the reason we're here today, I continued. What you all should know is that over the last 6 months, I've been working with the city's planning board, developers, and my legal team to explore a business acquisition project in this area. Now people were really paying attention. Patrick nodded. We've quietly purchased 3 properties adjacent to James and Darlene's residence through one of Mr. Bryson's companies. Based on public rezoning approvals and upcoming development initiatives, this area is projected to increase in value by 200% over the next 18 months. Murmurs. Head swiveling. My mom paled. Caleb blinked. Wait, what? I turned to him. You didn't know? That's surprising. You did spend the last year playing king of the castle. Patrick pulled out a manila envelope and handed it to Caleb. That's a formal purchase offer for the property. Full cash value. 25% above projected market rate. It's valid for 30 days. Caleb flipped through the packet like it was written in a foreign language. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm dead serious, I said. See, I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for resolution. You wanted the house. You fought for it. Fine. Keep it. But now you know what it's really worth. You can sell it and walk away with more money than you ever imagined. Or you can hold on to it, deal with the city, the developers, the permits, the taxes, the offers, the lawsuits, the attention. Your call. His face was red now. Sweating. Panicked. I don't understand. Why would you do this? I looked him in the eye. Because I want you to understand what it feels like to fight for something, win it, and still lose everything that mattered. A long, quiet beat passed. Then I turned to my parents. I loved you both more than anything, I said. And I still do. But love without respect is just performance. And I'm done performing. My mom looked heartbroken. My dad, stoic as ever, just nodded once. I don't know if it was guilt, regret, or silent acceptance. But I didn't need a scene. I didn't want one. I just wanted to leave on my own terms. Patrick turned to the crowd and added, for legal clarity, Mr. Bryson has no intention of contesting the current will. He's not interested in what was taken. He's interested in what he's building. Then we packed up our things. Elise, Patrick, and I walked past the stunned picnic, past Caleb still clutching the envelope, past the tangled years of misunderstanding, bitterness, and silence. And as we reached the car, I looked back one last time. They were still watching me. But this time, they weren't laughing. They were listening. And that was enough. Because sometimes, revenge isn't about hurting the people who hurt you. It's about showing them who you've become without them. I didn't need their name and a will to prove I mattered. I just needed to stop waiting for permission to live like I did. You know how people say you don't get to choose your family, but you do get to choose how much of them you let into your life? I used to think that was just one of those Pinterest quotes people share when they're annoyed at their in-laws. But now, at 31 years old, I finally get it. My name's Kyle, and I guess you could say I was the designated background character in my own family. The quiet one, the easygoing one, the one who didn't stir the pot. My older sister Rachel? She was the main character. The storm and the sun, depending on the day. And my parents? Well, they revolved around her like she was their personal North Star. I was born 3 years after Rachel, and from the jump, it was always Rachel this, Rachel that. She danced ballet. My mom signed up for every bake sale. I made varsity soccer. My dad said, "That's great, buddy," then walked out mid-game to take Rachel to her piano recital. I didn't resent it at first. That's just how things were. Rachel was dramatic, emotional, magnetic. I was steady, reliable, invisible. I figured if I kept my head down and didn't ask for too much, I'd avoid drama. That became a pattern, me stepping aside so Rachel could take center stage. Birthdays, graduations, even Christmas. One year I got a hoodie. She got a freaking MacBook because she needed it for college applications. She was in 10th grade. Still, I never said much. I moved out after college, landed a stable job in tech, and built a quiet life for myself. I didn't visit home often, but not because I was angry. I just liked peace. I had a small circle, a decent apartment, and eventually, I met someone who made everything click. Her name was Tessa, and she was grounding. Funny, kind, the type who remembered birthdays and asked deep questions and always saw me. We dated for 3 years before I proposed. Nothing flashy. Just us on a quiet beach with a thermos of hot cider and a ring I'd saved up for over months. She cried. I cried. It was the happiest moment of my life. And then Thanksgiving happened. Or didn't happen, I should say. See, my family has always made a big deal out of Thanksgiving. My parents host, everyone flies in, there's way too much food and awkward board games, and Dad trying to carve the turkey like he's Gordon Ramsay. I was actually excited this year because it would be Tessa's first Thanksgiving with my side of the family. She'd met my parents once, briefly, but this would be the big introduction. I even started practicing how I'd announce our engagement, maybe with a toast, maybe while we passed the pie. I had it all planned out. But then, about a week before the holiday, I got a call from my mom. Her voice was quiet, almost rehearsed. Hey honey, listen, your dad and I were talking, and we think maybe this year, it's best if you sit Thanksgiving out. I blinked. Wait, what? It's just, with everything Rachel's going through right now. You know, the divorce. Rachel and her husband, Evan, had been separated for a few months. It was messy, lots of crying, dramatic Facebook posts, even a smashed windshield, hers, not his. But last I heard, she was the one who initiated the split. I know she's hurting, I said slowly. But what does that have to do with me? Well, we just think it'd be too painful for her to see you and Tessa right now. You're engaged, she's not. It might be too much. I didn't say anything for a second because I genuinely didn't know what to say. So you're uninviting me? Because Rachel might get sad. It's not like that, Kyle. We love you. We're proud of you. We just think this year, it's about keeping the peace. You understand, right? I didn't understand. Not even a little. But I said, sure, Mom. Whatever's best. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. Tessa found me on the couch a few minutes later, staring at the wall. I told her what happened, tried to laugh it off, but my voice cracked halfway through. She just wrapped her arms around me and said, you don't have to explain. I get it. We ended up staying home for Thanksgiving. Just the two of us. We made stuffing from a box and burned the cranberry sauce. We watched old holiday movies and played Scrabble. I tried to enjoy it. I really did. But something gnawed at me the whole day, not just the uninviting, but the way my parents had said it. Like it was obvious. Like I should have expected it. Like Rachel's sadness trumped my joy by default. Then came Saturday. Tessa was scrolling through Instagram on the couch, half laughing at dog reels, when she froze. Kyle, she said, her voice tight. Come here. She handed me her phone. It was a photo from Rachel's page. She was standing in my parents' dining room, holding a mimosa and grinning ear to ear. She wore a sparkly beige dress, and her makeup looked freshly done. The table was full, stuffing, pie, turkey, even Mom's weird green bean casserole. But that wasn't what made my stomach drop. It was Evan. He was standing right next to her, smiling. His arm was around her waist. What? I whispered. Tessa bit her lip. Maybe it's an old picture? But then I swiped. Another photo. This time Rachel was holding a plate of pie. The caption said, Pumpkin season is healing season. Hashtag Thanksgiving. There were tags. My parents. My cousins. Evan. It wasn't an old picture. They had all been there. Evan included. The man she was supposedly too heartbroken over to be in the same room with me and Tessa. They'd lied. Not just to protect Rachel's feelings, but to exclude me. I wish I could say I called my mom right then and there and demanded answers. But I didn't. I stared at those pictures for a long time, my heart pounding, 1,000 thoughts racing through my head. And then, for the first time in a long time, something inside me snapped. Because this wasn't just about Thanksgiving. It wasn't just about one lie. It was about every single time I'd taken the back seat so Rachel could feel special. Every time I kept quiet to keep the peace. Every moment I smiled while being sidelined. And I realized something I probably should have realized years ago. I wasn't family to them. I was a prop. A convenience. Someone they could silence, sideline, or sacrifice if it made Rachel's life smoother. And that's when I started thinking. Planning. Because if they didn't want me to be part of their family, then maybe it was time they saw what it looked like when I stopped playing along. And what happened next? Well, let's just say Thanksgiving was the beginning of the end. I didn't confront them. Not right away. Instead, I let the silence hang. For once, I didn't reach out. I didn't call my mom to ask how the turkey turned out. I didn't text my dad the usual, "Hope you had a good one." I didn't comment on Rachel's post or drop a sarcastic emoji. I just vanished from the family group chat like I'd never existed. It took them 5 days to notice. On the 6th day, Mom finally texted. Just one line. "Hey sweetie, everything okay? Haven't heard from you." I stared at it for a while, then locked my phone and set it face down on the coffee table. Tessa and I had just gotten back from a walk through the park. The leaves were turning, that kind of golden brown that makes you nostalgic for things that haven't even happened yet. We sat down on the couch, mugs of hot tea in hand, and she asked gently, "You gonna talk to them?" I shook my head. Not yet. She didn't press. She never did. That's one of the things I love most about her. She doesn't force things to be okay. She just sits with me in the quiet until I'm ready. 2 days later, another text came in. "Kyle, are you mad at us?" I didn't answer that one either. Then came the call. Mom again. I let it ring out. She tried again 2 hours later, then followed it with a voicemail. Her voice was upbeat, cheerful, like nothing had happened. "Hey honey, just wanted to say hi. We miss you. Your dad says hi. Rachel might be coming over this weekend for a girls' night, but we'd love to do dinner with you and Tessa soon. Let me know." I played it twice. The first time in disbelief. The second time in something colder, something I didn't want to name yet. Girls' night. Right. With her still married husband, apparently. Weeks passed. I kept my distance. Tessa and I focused on our engagement, made tentative wedding plans. We wanted something small and meaningful, maybe a mountaintop ceremony, just us and a few friends. I didn't mention it to my family. Not once. And not because I forgot. Then, right before Christmas, my dad finally broke the silence. He showed up. At my apartment. I didn't even know he knew my address. But there he was, standing outside the door in a heavy coat, knocking like he had every right to be there. I opened it just enough to lean against the frame. "Hey, can I come in?" he asked, rubbing his gloved hands together. "It's freezing." I didn't move. "What do you want, Dad?" He blinked. "What do I?" "Kyle, what's going on?" "Your mom's been worried sick." I raised an eyebrow. "Worried enough to call me before Thanksgiving?" He frowned. "That's not fair. We did call you." "No," I said. "You called to tell me not to come." A long pause. "She was hurting, Kyle. We were just trying to keep things from getting worse." I stared at him. "She posted selfies with her husband, Dad." His jaw tightened. "That's complicated." "No." I snapped, the words bubbling up before I could stop them. "It's not. What's complicated is you asking me to step aside so Rachel can keep pretending she's the victim in a breakup she started." He looked away. "You lied," I said, softer now. "You chose her. Again. Like always." "I didn't choose." "Stop." The hallway was quiet except for the hum of the heater. "I've always made it easy for you," I said. "I've never caused problems. I never complained when you skipped my games. I never brought up how you spent $5,000 on Rachel's birthday trip to Cabo and told me to be grateful for a Target gift card. I never said anything when she crashed my car and you told me to be the bigger person. I let it all go, because I thought if I just kept being good, you'd eventually see me." His eyes flickered. "But you never did," I said. "And now I'm done trying." He didn't say anything for a long time. Then, finally, he nodded slowly. "If that's how you feel." "It is." He turned to go. "Oh, and Dad," I added. He paused. "We're getting married in June. We'll be sending invites soon. You don't have to come." He opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, then closed it again. He left without saying another word. I shut the door. My hands were shaking. Tessa was in the kitchen, silent, watching. When I finally looked at her, she nodded once. "Good," she said. Christmas came and went. No presents. No calls. Just another set of photos on Instagram. Rachel in matching pajamas with my parents. Evan beside her again. Caption: "Sometimes healing means surrounding yourself with the ones who always show up. #family first." That one stung more than the others. Maybe because it wasn't just a photo. It was a message. They weren't just ignoring me. They were replacing me. Rewriting the narrative to paint Rachel as the golden child and me as the bitter outsider. And the worst part? They believed it. January was quiet. Too quiet. I stopped checking Rachel's page, unfollowed her eventually. I figured maybe this was just my new reality. A clean break. A sad one, but clean. Then came February. And with it, the betrayal that finally shattered the illusion I'd been holding on to since I was a kid. It started with a text from my cousin Lauren. We weren't close, but we saw each other enough at family events to stay friendly. Hey Kyle, super random question. Are you registered at Crate and Barrel? I blinked. I hadn't told anyone in the extended family about our wedding yet. No. What? Weird. Just gotta save the date for your wedding. Says registries at Crate and Barrel. Thought it might be fake. My stomach turned cold. I called her immediately. What did the invite look like? I asked. It was like beige with gold lettering. Said Kyle and Tessa in script. Had a June date. Same last name. I figured it was you. I rubbed my temple. Can you send me a picture? She did. It was my name. And Tessa's. But the email to RSVP back was one I didn't recognize. And the venue? Some fancy event space 3 towns over. We hadn't even booked anything yet. Someone was pretending to host our wedding. I showed Tessa the photo. Her face drained. Is this a scam? I don't think so, I said slowly. I think it's worse. I scrolled down the invite and found it, clear as day. Hosted lovingly by Michael and Denise Henderson. My parents' names. My heart was pounding. They had fabricated an entire wedding event. In our names. Without telling us. And the guest list? I didn't even want to know. I called my mom. She didn't answer. I called again. Then Dad. Same result. Finally, I messaged Rachel. Hey, did you send out wedding invites in my name? She replied instantly. Relax. Mom and Dad just wanted to help you out. You've been so distant lately, they figured you were overwhelmed. We thought it'd be a nice surprise. I stared at the message. A surprise. They'd hijacked my wedding planning. Decided they knew better. Invited people I hadn't spoken to in years. Claimed they were helping, all while cutting me out of every decision. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Tessa sat beside me, reading over my shoulder. Her hand found mine. We need to talk to them. Now. I nodded. But I didn't call this time. I drove. We got in the car that night, snow still on the ground, tires crunching over icy patches as I clenched the steering wheel. My parents lived 40 minutes away, but that night, it felt like hours. When we arrived, their lights were on. Evan's car was in the driveway. I knocked hard. Mom opened the door, surprised. Kyle, honey, you should have called. We would have. I held up the invite. She paled. What is this? She glanced behind her, then stepped outside, closing the door behind her. It was just a gesture, she said quickly. You've been distant. We didn't know what your plans were, and we didn't want people to think you weren't including family. So you just made it up? I said, voice rising. You picked a venue, created an email, and told people you were hosting my wedding? You're our son, she said. We were just trying to help. No, I said. You were trying to control it. Like everything else. She folded her arms. You're being dramatic. That word. Dramatic. Like Rachel. The one who blew up over everything and still got protected. And here I was, finally setting a boundary, and I was the problem. Tessa stepped forward. Her voice was calm but icy. We're planning our wedding. Not you. Not Rachel. Not Evan. Us. And if you can't respect that, you're not coming. My mom blinked, like Tessa had slapped her. We just wanted to feel included. I let out a bitter laugh. You had one chance. One. To include us. You uninvited me from Thanksgiving. You lied. And now this. She looked hurt. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I stepped back. No, I said. You already did that. And that was the moment I knew. I wasn't stepping back anymore. I was stepping away. And the next part? That's when the real revenge began. It's funny how silence can feel louder than shouting. The ride home after that confrontation was quiet. Not the tense kind of silence, but the heavy, exhausted kind. Like both Tessa and I had just run a marathon we didn't sign up for. My hands were still clenching the wheel too tightly, and hers were in her lap, twisting the sleeve of her coat around her fingers. The only sound was the rhythmic swoosh of the windshield wipers brushing away light flurries. Neither of us said it out loud, but we both knew something had changed. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was a fracture. A deep, irreparable crack. I felt it in my bones. And yet, I didn't cry. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not when my dad finally texted me the next day saying, "Your mother's very upset. We were only trying to help. If you want to move forward, let us know." That line, "if you want to move forward," sat in my gut like a cold stone. Like the responsibility to fix everything was mine. Again, I left it on read. The truth was, I didn't have it in me anymore. To explain. To defend. To apologize for not being who they wanted. I was tired. Tired of always being the buffer between their dysfunction and my own peace. Tired of being the afterthought who was expected to be grateful for crumbs. And in the weeks that followed, I slipped into something close to depression. I still got up every day. I still showered, brushed my teeth, answered emails. But I wasn't really there. I was running on autopilot. My appetite vanished. I lost weight. I started dodging calls from friends. When my cousin Lauren messaged me to ask if everything was okay, because Rachel just told everyone the wedding was postponed due to your mental health issues, I didn't even respond. I just closed my laptop and went to bed in the middle of the afternoon. That lie hit me hard. Not because it was unexpected, but because it felt so perfectly calculated to make them look like the compassionate victims. Poor Kyle. He's struggling again. We're just so heartbroken we had to postpone the wedding. The narrative was already taking shape, and I could feel myself disappearing from my own story. The worst part? A small, bitter part of me started to believe it. That maybe I was the problem. That maybe I was too sensitive, too distant, too cold. That maybe my parents had tried their best, and I'd just failed to be the kind of son they could love properly. But then, one morning in early March, I woke up to Tessa on the balcony of our apartment, phone in hand, tears in her eyes. I rushed out, thinking something had happened, but when I asked what was wrong, she just handed me her phone. It was a message from her mom. "Sweetheart, I've been thinking. Kyle deserves better than this. You both do. If you want to do something just for you two, we'll support it. Financially, logistically, emotionally. No strings. Just let us help." I read it twice, then a third time, and for the first time in months, I felt something stir in me. It wasn't anger. It was hope. Tessa's parents had always been kind, but distant in a respectful way, never intrusive, never overbearing. Her dad was a quiet, observant type, the kind of guy who watched everything and said little. Her mom was the opposite, warm, chatty, always baking something, but she never overstepped. And now, here they were, offering us a lifeline. Not just financially, but emotionally. And something about that broke the dam I didn't know I was holding back. I sat down on the balcony beside her, took her hand, and whispered, "Okay, let's do this our way." That's how the rebuilding began. Not in a grand, sweeping way, but in quiet, deliberate steps. We started by canceling everything. The fake registry, the fake email, the venue that my parents had somehow put a deposit on without our knowledge. Turns out Rachel helped them set it up, just in case Kyle changes his mind, she told one of my cousins. I called the vendors, explained the situation with as much professionalism as I could muster, and then I opened a blank spreadsheet. We made a new wedding plan. This time, it was just us. We decided to rent a cabin in the mountains with a wraparound porch and a view that looked like it belonged on a postcard. The guest list? No more than 20 people. No plus ones unless we knew them personally. No photographers we didn't trust. No staged moments. Just love. Just real. And for the first time, wedding planning felt fun. We chose everything ourselves. The music, the vows, the food. We went with wood-fired pizza and a build-your-own Esmores bar. Tessa wore a simple dress she found on Etsy. I bought a navy blue suit from a local shop. We invited her parents, my cousin Lauren, a few of my close college friends, and a handful of her longtime childhood buddies. That was it. Not a single Henderson. And the strangest thing? It didn't feel empty. It felt right. But the rebuilding didn't stop with the wedding. With the help of Tessa, and maybe, finally, the space to see things clearly, I started making other changes. I set boundaries with people who used to drain me. I turned down family Zoom calls where I knew I'd be asked passive-aggressive questions. I even got a new phone number and only gave it out to people who genuinely cared. I started going to therapy, something I'd always said I'd get around to someday. In our first session, I told my therapist that I felt like a ghost in my own family. He nodded and said something I'll never forget. "That's because you were trained to disappear." That hit me harder than I expected. Not because it was new information, but because it was the first time someone else said it out loud. He didn't frame it as a weakness. He framed it as survival, as something I'd learned to do in order to stay sane in a household where love was conditional and peace always came at my expense. He helped me see that stepping away wasn't betrayal. It was healing. That summer, Tessa and I got married in the mountains under a sky that looked like it had been painted just for us. The air smelled like pine and lavender. Her dad walked her down the aisle, and when we said our vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the cabin, including mine. We didn't live stream it. We didn't post pictures until weeks later. We didn't do any of the performative stuff that used to feel obligatory. It wasn't about proving anything. It was just about us. And when we got back home, there was a letter in our mailbox. No return address. Just my name, written in careful cursive. Inside was a card. We're sorry we missed the wedding. We heard it was small and beautiful. We're hurt you didn't want us there, but we hope one day you'll come around. Family is forever. There was no signature, but I knew the handwriting. My mother had always prided herself on her penmanship. I read it once, then again, and then I put it in the shredder, not out of anger, but out of peace. Because that version of me, the one who would have written back, apologized, explained, he didn't exist anymore. I wasn't living in their story now. I was writing my own. And as it turned out, it was a better story. One where I was finally the main character. One where I didn't have to apologize for being happy. And just when I thought things had finally settled, just when I started to believe the worst was behind me, I got a message that changed everything. A message that would drag me right back into the drama I thought I'd escaped. And this time, I wouldn't be stepping away quietly. I'd be stepping in with receipts. It was a Wednesday when the message came in. I'd just gotten back from a client call and was halfway through reheating leftover pizza when my phone buzzed with a notification. Not a name I recognized at first glance, just a random Gmail address in my inbox. Subject line, you should probably see this. There was no greeting, no explanation, just a Google Drive link and one line of text beneath it. She's not who you think she is. I hovered over the link, suspicious. Tessa glanced over from the couch. Spam. Maybe, I muttered. But I clicked it anyway. It opened to a folder titled, Screenshots, Rachel's Group Chat. And just like that, my stomach dropped. Inside were dozens of screenshots, text messages, Instagram DMs, even some voice notes. All of them from a group chat titled, Henderson Wedding War Room. The participants? My mom, my sister Rachel, and a few of Rachel's close friends I hadn't seen since college. Not Evan, curiously, but a few of his sisters were in the chat, chiming in here and there with snide commentary. The first screenshot was dated months before Thanksgiving. Rachel. Okay, but if Kyle thinks he's just going to show up and steal the spotlight with his little Pinterest engagement, he's dumber than I thought, LOL. Mom. Let's not be mean, sweetie. But yes, we need to be careful. This can't turn into Kyle and Tessa, the holiday special. It's not fair to you. Rachel. Exactly. Like I'm going through a divorce and now I have to pretend to be happy for them? Pass. Mom. We'll figure something out. Maybe suggest they sit out this year. We'll say it's about your healing. Rachel. God, I love you. I stopped reading. My hands were shaking. The pizza sat forgotten on the counter behind me. Tessa stood up, walked over silently, and looked over my shoulder. I clicked into the next screenshot. Then the next. It only got worse. Rachel later. LMAO Evan said he'll come to Thanksgiving if there's pie. Should we make it chocolate so Kyle really gets the message? Mom. Let's not be petty, but yes. He hates chocolate. Rachel. Consider it done. There were dozens more like it. Them mocking our wedding plans. Calling Tessa generic. Joking about how Kyle probably still thinks we're being nice to keep the family together. One even had my dad chiming in. Dad. It's just easier to let Rachel feel like she's the priority. Kyle doesn't hold grudges. He'll bounce back like always. That one hurt the most. Because it was true. I had always bounced back. Quietly. Without complaint. And they were counting on that again. Only this time. I wasn't bouncing. I kept scrolling, screenshot after screenshot, until I hit one that nearly made me drop the phone. Rachel, 3 weeks ago. Okay, so I was thinking, what if we just make a new Instagram account for their wedding? Post some pics, tag Crate and Barrel, make it look real. That way people stop asking questions, and we can control the vibe. Kyle barely uses social anyway. Mom. That's smart. Can we pull photos from Pinterest or something? Rachel. Already on it. Just found one with a couple that looks kinda like them from behind. Mom. You're amazing. Truly. My ears were hot. My heart was pounding in my throat. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And yet, everything suddenly made sense. The fake wedding. The emails. The silent treatment. It was all coordinated. A slow, premeditated erasure of me and Tessa. And now I had proof. But I didn't rage. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. Instead, something settled into place, calm, focused, cold. I looked at Tessa, who had turned white as a sheet. You okay? She whispered. I nodded once. No. but I know what I'm going to do. The first step was simple. I downloaded everything, every screenshot, every file, organized them by date and topic, added context in a separate Google document. I wasn't about to let anything get lost in translation. If I was going to war with my family, I needed my armor airtight. I had no idea who sent the email. Still don't, to this day. Maybe someone in the group chat had grown a conscience. Maybe someone's kid found it and thought I deserved to know. I didn't care. All that mattered was that I had it. Then came phase 2. Silence. No confrontations. No warning shots. I didn't block them. I didn't even unfriend them. Instead, I waited. Because the best revenge, I was beginning to realize, isn't loud. It's strategic. And the first real opportunity came sooner than I expected. Tessa and I had sent out physical invitations for our real wedding a few weeks before. Small, handmade, minimalist design. We sent them to our inner circle and a few distant family members I did trust. Lauren got one, of course. So did a couple of my dad's old cousins who always remembered my birthday, even when my parents didn't. Then one morning, I got a text from Lauren. Lauren, heads up, Rachel just posted a TikTok saying she's officiating your wedding. I blinked. Officiating? I jumped on TikTok, pulled up her profile, still public, and there it was. A 30-second video of her in front of a mirror, practicing a speech. Caption: Can't believe I get to officiate my baby brother's big day. He always wanted me there for this moment. Hashtag wedding season, hashtag blessed. Tessa watched over my shoulder, equal parts horrified and amused. I mean, bold of her to just invent a job like that. I chuckled, bitterly. And then I had an idea. The kind that starts as a whisper in your brain, but quickly becomes a shout. What if we let her keep thinking she was in control? What if we leaned in, just enough to make them believe they'd won? And then, at the perfect moment, pulled the rug out from under them? I started making calls. Lauren was the first. She came over the next day, laptop in hand, and we laid everything out. The screenshots, the TikTok, the fake invites. She was furious, not just on my behalf, but for how easily the rest of the family was being duped. Honestly, she said, the way they treat you. I'm not even surprised. But I am done pretending. So I gave her a role, document handler. She would manage the timeline of receipts. If anyone tried to twist the story later, we'd be ready with facts. Next, we brought in James, an old friend from college who now worked in event security. He agreed to work our wedding for free, under one condition. You let me tackle someone if they show up uninvited. Tempting, I said, but just walk them out. Nicely. We also looped in a friend of Tessa's named Priya, a digital marketing whiz who helped us craft a public-facing version of our story, one that didn't spill all the tea, but hinted just enough to control the narrative. We made a wedding website. On the homepage, a personal message from us. After much reflection, we've chosen to celebrate our love quietly, with those who've always respected our boundaries. If you didn't receive a personal invitation, we kindly ask that you celebrate from afar and honor our space. This is a joyful, intentional gathering, not a spectacle. We didn't name names, but we didn't need to. And then, in the officiant section, a picture of our actual officiant, my high school English teacher, Mrs. Kramer, a woman who had encouraged me to write, believed in me when I was just a quiet teen in the back row, and who cried when I invited her. I made the site unlisted, but Lauren made sure it got shared in the right Facebook groups. Within 2 days, Rachel's TikTok was deleted. Within 3, Mom messaged me for the first time in over a month. Mom, Kyle, I don't understand what's going on. Why are people saying we're not invited? I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I updated the RSVP system on the site to include a filter. If your name wasn't on the approved list, you got this message. Thank you for your interest, but we're unable to accommodate additional guests. Wishing you peace and love from afar. It worked beautifully. One by one, the dominoes fell. Rachel posted a cryptic Instagram story. Some people forget who was there for them first. While Mom commented under an old photo of me and Tessa, I miss you. You'll regret this someday. Dad, radio silence. I knew what they were doing. Trying to guilt me back into the role I'd always played. The peacemaker. The one who bent so others didn't break. But that version of me was gone. And in his place was someone stronger. Someone who wasn't afraid to say no. And as the wedding drew closer, with every RSVP confirmed and every plan finalized, I could feel the moment building. The moment where they'd realize they weren't just being excluded. They were being exposed. And I had one final card to play. One that would make sure everyone finally saw them for who they really were. All I had to do was wait for the perfect time to flip it. The morning of the wedding was still, not quiet. There were birds chirping and a gentle wind rustling the trees. But still, in that sacred way that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath for something important. The cabin sat tucked away on a mountain ridge, surrounded by evergreens and soft golden light. It was the kind of morning you wish you could bottle and keep forever. Tessa looked ethereal. No fancy makeup. No cathedral veil. Just her, in a simple ivory dress, hair loosely pinned, smile radiant. I stood in front of the mirror adjusting my tie, watching her reflection as she laughed with her best friend Priya, and I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. That's what surprised me most. Not the calm before the storm. The calm during it. Because I knew the storm was coming. And this time, I was the one who'd brought the clouds. The ceremony was perfect. Mrs. Kramer officiated like she was born to do it. Warm, poetic, funny in all the right places. Our vows made half the guests cry. Even James, the ex-linebacker security guy, wiped a tear before pretending he had something in his eye. We toasted, we danced, we ate wood-fired pizza, and sipped mulled wine by the fire. There were Polaroids and handwritten letters from friends. Stories. Hugs. No drama. And then, just after the sun dipped below the horizon, James got a buzz in his earpiece and looked over at me from across the yard. He raised a single eyebrow. The signal. They were here. Rachel, Mom, Dad, and, for good measure, two of Rachel's old high school friends in matching dresses like it was their red carpet. They weren't on the guest list. But they came anyway. Bold, entitled, and exactly on cue. James met them halfway down the gravel path. Tessa and I watched from the porch, hidden behind one of the pine beams. Rachel led the charge, of course. "We're here for the wedding," she said, brushing a curl over her shoulder like this was all perfectly normal. James folded his arms. "And your names? You know who we are." "I do. That's why I'm asking." Rachel scoffed. "You've got to be kidding me." My mother stepped in then, hands folded like she was preparing for a sermon. "We're family," she said softly, trying that old, concerned matriarch voice she always used when guilt-tripping me as a kid. "Sure," James said calmly. "And you're not on the list." "We don't need to be on a list," Rachel snapped. "This is my brother's wedding." James reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. I recognized it. So did they. It was the same envelope I'd mailed them 6 weeks ago. Empty. Just their names. No invitation. "I think you do," James said, handing it to Rachel. She tore it open like maybe, this time it would magically contain an invite. Like I'd changed my mind at the last minute. Like she still mattered more than consequences. But it was still empty. Just a folded card that read, "This space reserved for someone who respects boundaries. Better luck next time." Rachel's mouth fell open. Mom went pale. And Dad? He turned to leave. That was the moment I knew. He knew it was over. Rachel, on the other hand, wasn't done. She tried to march past James, heels sinking into the gravel. "You can't stop me," she hissed. "This is public property." "No," James said. "It's not. It's a private venue. Booked under a private party license. You trespass, I call the sheriff." "You wouldn't." He raised a brow. "Try me." Rachel's friend piped up. "You guys are seriously insane. He's your brother. Rachel loved you." "Rachel used me," I said, stepping into view. They all turned at once. I was still in my wedding suit, but I stood taller than I ever had before. "Used me," I repeated. "Lied about me. Tried to erase me from my own life. And now? You're shocked I finally drew a line." Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but I kept going. "You faked a wedding in my name. Mocked my fiancé. Mocked me. Built a group chat to plan my humiliation like it was a party game. And even after we gave you a way to quietly back off, you came here. Uninvited. On our day. Because you really believed it was still about you." Mom looked like she might cry. "Kyle, we just wanted to be part of it." "No," I said coldly. "You wanted control. You wanted a show. You don't get either." And then I pulled out my final card. I reached into my coat pocket and handed Rachel a small USB stick. "What's this?" "Everything," I said. "Your texts. Your group chat. Your voice notes. The lies. The manipulation. All compiled. All backed up. One copy went to every family member who got your fake wedding invite. Another went to Evan's lawyer. Because I figured if you're this bold with me, You're probably just as reckless with your divorce proceedings. Her face dropped. You're bluffing. Am I? I nodded to Priya, who stood on the porch with her laptop. She hit play. A speaker by the door crackled to life. Rachel's voice. Kyle probably still thinks we're being nice to keep the family together. He's so dumb. Let him plan his little fairy tale. We'll take over when it matters. Mom gasped. Dad stepped back, rubbing his eyes. Turn that off. Rachel screamed. I waved to Priya. She stopped it after 5 seconds. Plenty more where that came from, I said quietly. Silence. Then, finally, Rachel broke. She turned on my mom. Why didn't you stop him? Why didn't you tell me he had that? Mom didn't answer. Because what could she say? They'd lost. And everyone knew it. Tessa came to stand beside me then. She didn't say a word. Just slid her hand into mine. It was over. No yelling. No chaos. Just a slow, devastating collapse of everything they'd tried to build on lies. James stepped forward one last time. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Rachel looked like she might protest, but my dad, silent until now, put a hand on her shoulder. Let's go. His voice was flat. Hollow. Like something had finally clicked. They turned and left. No goodbyes. Just footsteps crunching down the gravel, fading into the woods. We went back inside and rejoined the party. The music played. Laughter returned. The fire crackled as the stars came out one by one. Later that night, as the last few guests were gathered around the S. Moret's bar and Mrs. Kramer gave an impromptu poetry reading, Lauren came up to me with a glass of cider. She raised it. To peace. To truth, I said. We clinked. And for the first time in my life, I felt whole. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally chosen myself. That's the thing about family. Sometimes it's the people who raise you. And sometimes it's the people who help you rise. I'll never forget what it felt like watching them walk away. But I'll also never forget what it felt like walking back inside, with my wife, my friends, my real family, knowing I'd finally closed the door. For good. And this time, I didn't look back. My name's Daniel. I'm 33, I live in Seattle, and up until this year, I thought I was the glue holding my family together. Not because they ever made me feel like it, God knows they didn't, but because I was always the one who showed up. Birthdays, graduations, hospital visits. I was the one buying the gifts, organizing the reunions, paying the tab, and more recently, quietly picking up the financial slack no one ever talked about. Mortgage 2 months behind? Dan will handle it. Someone's car breaks down? Call Danny, he'll get you a rental. Family phone plan short on the bill? Just ask Dan. He makes good money in tech. And for years, I did. Not because I wanted praise, but because I thought that's what being a good son, nephew, and brother looked like. I thought maybe, if I just kept giving, one day they'd treat me like I mattered even half as much as I treated them. But this year broke something in me. I'd been planning my 34th birthday for months. I didn't want anything huge, just something meaningful. A weekend getaway at a penthouse suite in Portland. 2 nights. I covered everything. Rooms for each person, a private chef on Saturday night, tickets to a jazz show downtown, even little care packages I had made with personalized notes and snacks everyone loved. I sent the invites out 6 weeks in advance. Made a group chat. Called everyone personally to make sure the dates worked. My cousin Jess said she was so excited. My sister Amanda swore she'd be there, no matter what. Mom asked if there'd be vegetarian options. There were, of course. I even double-checked the room assignments 3 times to make sure no one would end up sharing if they didn't want to. Friday came. I checked into the suite early, did a walkthrough, and left everyone's envelopes on the beds, each with a handwritten note and a little card with the weekend's schedule. Then I waited. Check-in time passed. No one. An hour. Still nothing. I texted the group. Hey, just checking. Everything okay? Let me know if anyone's running late. No replies. I called Amanda. No answer. Jess. Straight to voicemail. My mom? Sent me to text. I sat by the window, watching the rain blur the city lights, refreshing the group chat, watching the little delivered marks mock me. I kept telling myself there must have been traffic. A flat tire. A delay. Something. But there wasn't. Around 8 p.m., I gave up and ordered room service. Ate alone. Watched the jazz tickets on the coffee table go unused. Slept on the couch even though the master suite was mine, just to avoid seeing the untouched envelopes on everyone else's beds. The next morning, I checked my phone and froze. There it was, posted by my Aunt Linda. A selfie of her, Amanda, Jess, and my mom at Ricky's diner, The place back home with $5 pancakes and sticky booths. The caption, "Nothing beats spontaneous family dinners." I stared at the photo for a long time. They were all smiling. Matching sweaters. My mom was holding up a glass of lemonade like she was toasting something. Maybe to family. Maybe to loyalty. Maybe to the fact that I was 200 miles away, alone, with a fridge full of catered food and 10 empty chairs. I didn't comment. Didn't text. Didn't call. But something in me clicked. I walked over to the desk, opened my laptop, and started going through the numbers. The mortgage on Mom's house, I've been auto-paying that for the last 8 months. My dad had passed away a few years back, and I never made a big deal about helping her stay afloat. Just said it and forgot it. Car payment? My sister's lease was under my name. She missed a few payments last year, and I quietly stepped in. The family phone plan? That was still tied to my account, too. I never even saw the monthly charges anymore. It was just another number buried in the auto-pay list. I didn't do anything drastic right away. I just paused the payments. Quietly. Methodically. Then I packed up my things, canceled the rest of the suite reservation, and drove back to Seattle in silence. That night, I sat in my apartment, scrolling through old messages. All the "can you help?" texts. That you're the only one who understands guilt trips. The Venmo requests. The last-minute emergencies. Birthday cards I'd sent that never got replies. I reread the message I'd sent in the group chat, still unread. The next morning, my phone started buzzing. First it was Amanda, then Mom, then Aunt Linda, then 3 calls from a number I didn't recognize, probably Jess using someone else's phone. I didn't answer. Let it all go to voicemail. By noon, I'd gotten 5 emails, 6 texts, and 2 voice messages that started with fake concern and ended with frantic demands. Mom said, "The mortgage company says they didn't receive the payment. Did your bank mess something up?" Amanda's was shorter. "Hey, the car app says I'm overdue. Can you check that for me?" I turned the phone face down. I made tea, sat on the balcony, watched the sun go down over the sound. That evening, Aunt Linda finally texted me something that almost made me laugh. "Why are you being so passive-aggressive? If you were hurt, you should have said something. We didn't think it was that serious." And that's when I realized they never thought it was serious. I wasn't a person to them. I was a service, a safety net, a ghost who paid the bills and didn't ask for thanks. The good one who never caused problems, never said no, never missed a holiday even when they missed me. So no, I didn't reply to her either. Instead, I poured another cup of tea and opened up a spreadsheet, one I hadn't looked at in a while. A list of every expense I'd covered in the last 5 years. Dates, amounts, names, all organized, neatly, just in case I ever needed a reminder of how much I'd given and how little I'd gotten in return. And then I started planning the rest of what I'd take back. Monday morning came with a quiet kind of clarity. You know that stillness right before a thunderstorm rolls in? That's what it felt like. Not loud, not angry, just inevitable. I'd spent the night before combing through accounts. I didn't just want to pull the plug. I wanted to do it cleanly, deliberately, and in a way that made it undeniable that this wasn't a bank glitch or a missed reminder. This was me, Daniel, the family doormat with a high credit limit, finally flipping the switch. First, I logged into the mortgage account. The house was in Mom's name, but the auto payment had been running through my account ever since Dad passed. She never asked for it, she expected it. There's a difference. She'd call me crying about how things were tighter than expected after the funeral, and I didn't even hesitate. But since then, not a single "thank you." Just subtle digs at how I was lucky to live in a city with tech money, as if that excused the growing list of IOUs no one planned to repay. I didn't cancel the mortgage payment. I revoked the authorization, removed my account completely, and called the bank to confirm it in writing. That alone would raise a red flag by Wednesday when the payment failed to clear. Next, Amanda's car. The lease was under my name because she couldn't qualify on her own credit. I'd co-signed, set up the insurance, and paid the last 3 months without even mentioning it. But over the holidays, she'd posted a story of herself peeling out of the driveway with the caption, "Grind now, shine later." Like she was the one paying for that shiny little BMW. I opened the leasing app, reported that I was no longer financially responsible, and set a 10-day notice to return the vehicle due to non-payment. That would hit her by Friday. Then came the family phone plan. That one hurt, not because it was expensive, but because it was one of the first things I'd ever offered them freely. I'd added my mom, Amanda, my aunt, and even Jess to my unlimited plan years ago, back when I first got promoted. It was stupid, maybe, But I remember thinking, this is something small I can do to make their lives easier. They never even knew what it cost. Never once asked. Just sent me their new phone request whenever their old one cracked or acted slow. So I went into the provider portal, removed all 4 lines, and scheduled the disconnection for Tuesday at midnight. I didn't send a warning. Didn't explain. Let them find out the same way I found out they were skipping my birthday, through a screen. By lunchtime, my phone was blowing up. First it was texts. Mom, Dan, what's happening with the house payment? I got a call from the bank. Amanda, is the car app broken? It's saying I'm in violation. Jess, hey, are you okay? Aunt Linda says your number's acting weird. Can we talk? Then the calls started again. 5 from Mom, 4 from Amanda, 1 from Aunt Linda, and a string of voicemail full notifications that I ignored like a reflex. But then came the one message that made me pause. Just for a second. It was from my mom. She texted, I don't know what we did to make you so cold. But this is cruel, Daniel. Cruel. That word sank in deeper than I expected. Not because she was right, but because it confirmed everything I already knew. In her mind, I was being unreasonable. Not hurt. Not disappointed. Cruel. As if backing away from years of unpaid labor and one-sided love made me heartless. I stared at the message for a while. Then I typed something, deleted it. Typed again. Deleted again. What was the point? No one really heard me before. Why would they start now? So instead, I sent nothing. Not even a read receipt. But I did something else. I opened that spreadsheet I'd started, the one with every expense, every date, every favor that was never returned. And I added a new tab, emotional labor. I started jotting down moments. Christmas Eve 2019, when I stayed up assembling Amanda's kids' bikes while everyone else drank and watched movies. The time Jess forgot her wallet at brunch and said, you don't mind, right? In front of 6 people. My mom's 60th, when I footed the catering bill and she spent half the party telling her friends how distant I'd been lately. Line after line. Not because I needed payback, but because I needed to remember. I needed to stop rewriting history to make their behavior feel less hollow. By the end of Monday, I had another plan forming. Not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. I wasn't going to ruin their lives. That's never been my style. But I was going to finally let them live their lives, the ones they kept pretending they built on their own. Without me. Without my money. Without my silence. And I had one last move to make before the week was over. It involved a letter. A printed one. Folded and sealed. But I'll save that for later. Because that night, just as I turned off the lights and got into bed, I saw one more post. A Facebook status from my Aunt Linda. It's funny how the people you do the most for are the first to act like you never did enough. The comments? Full of supportive clucks and so true emojis. And that was it. That was the moment I stopped grieving my family and started preparing for the fallout. Because they thought I was just going to fade into the background again. They had no idea what I was about to do next. Tuesday morning started like any other: coffee, email, a quick scroll through news, but the air felt different. I wasn't dreading the usual flood of requests or passive-aggressive guilt trips. I knew they were coming, sure. But for once, I wasn't panicking. I wasn't racing to fix anything. I wasn't available. I was free. Until the notifications started. The family group chat, once silent for days at a time, suddenly lit up like a Christmas tree on fire. Amanda texted, okay, seriously, what is going on? My car is locked. I can't even open it. Mom texted, Daniel, the phone is off. Mine too. What's happening? Call me from your work phone or something. Jess texted, wait, did you really cancel all this over a missed birthday? Aunt Linda texted, Dan, you need to grow up. This isn't how family handles things. You're acting like a child. A child. That one actually made me laugh. The irony of being called immature by the same woman who still gets her phone paid for by her nephew wasn't lost on me. Still, I said nothing. The phone rang again, Amanda this time. Then Mom. Then again. I watched the names appear and vanish without touching the screen. I wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. Because what they didn't know was that I'd already set everything else in motion. That sealed letter I mentioned? It was now printed, addressed, and ready to be mailed. 5 copies, 1 for each of them. Inside was no big dramatic speech. No insults. No lectures. Just receipts. Literal ones. A breakdown of everything I'd paid for in the past 6 years. House payments. Car bills. Insurance. Groceries. Phones. Even a $3,000 emergency dental bill Jess had conveniently forgotten I'd covered 2 Christmases ago. Each section was labeled by name and year. Nothing accusatory. Just cold, hard numbers. And at the end? A single paragraph. I've kept quiet for years, thinking that maybe, one day, the effort I put into this family would be noticed. That someone would say thank you. That someone would show up for me. That didn't happen. So now I'm showing up for myself. Going forward, I won't be funding anyone's life but my own. Consider this the last favor I'll do in silence. I didn't include a return address. Just a type name, Daniel M. By Wednesday, those letters would arrive. By Thursday, the next wave would hit. Because while they were scrambling to figure out how to keep the lights on, I was making sure they finally saw the cost of everything they took for granted. But what none of them realized yet, what I hadn't told anyone, was that this wasn't just about the money. It was about the truth. See, for the past 2 years, I'd been quietly documenting everything. Not just the expenses, but the conversations, the messages, the screenshots, the voice notes. Every time I was gaslit, guilt-tripped, or brushed off, I had it all. Not because I ever planned to use it, but because somewhere deep down, I always knew this day would come. That I'd have to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. That I had been used, dismissed, taken advantage of. I wasn't going to post it online. I wasn't going to start a war. But I was going to tell my story. In my words. And I knew exactly how. See, what I hadn't told them, and what they clearly never bothered to ask, was that I'd recently started writing under a pseudonym. Just short essays. Personal stories. Observations about family, loyalty, and boundaries. I submitted one to a mid-sized blog that focused on emotional wellness and recovery from toxic relationships. A piece titled, The Invisible Sun. They published it last week. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. And judging by the traction, it was already getting shares, comments, emails from strangers thanking me for finally putting their feelings into words. I wasn't alone. The most popular comment so far? I thought I was the only one. Thank you for making me feel seen. I hadn't responded yet, but I would, because that's who I am. I show up for people who actually see me. By Wednesday morning, when the letters landed and the phone stayed off, I imagined the panic would hit a new level. There'd be yelling, blaming, maybe even a rushed plan to stage an intervention or rope in a neutral cousin to mediate. But that wasn't going to work anymore, because I was done waiting for them to act like a family. They'd made their choice the night they skipped my birthday and smiled for selfies at a cheap diner. And I'd made mine when I stopped answering. But the real twist? That was still coming. Wednesday morning came with no real surprises, only the deep, detached calm that settles in when the storm you've been waiting for finally arrives. I woke up to 17 missed calls, 5 voicemails, 2 long emails with subject lines in all caps. My phone buzzed like a beehive about to collapse, each new ping another ripple in the aftermath I'd already made peace with. The letters had been delivered. I knew that because Jess texted me short, clipped, and full of nerve. She said, "You really kept receipts? Over $12,000? Are you trying to shame us?" No, Jess. If I wanted to shame you, I'd have sent copies to your workplace. Then Aunt Linda chimed in, this time via email. Daniel, this is an unnecessary escalation. Family isn't about transactions. We've all made sacrifices. You just happened to be in a position to help. You should feel proud, not resentful. I stared at that sentence. You just happened to be in a position to help. And there it was. The final confirmation. In their eyes, none of what I gave was generosity. None of it was sacrifice. It was just expected. I wasn't a son, or a brother, or a nephew. I was a debit card. No one called to apologize. Not sincerely. No one said, "I'm sorry we didn't show up." No one asked how I felt. They were too busy panicking about the fact that I wasn't holding up the sky for them anymore. That afternoon, the lease company picked up Amanda's car. I watched the app light up with status changes in real time. Payment failed. Account suspended. Vehicle disabled. Then finally, vehicle retrieved. It must have been a scene. Amanda, standing in her apartment parking lot in gym clothes, watching her little BMW get towed away while yelling at someone who couldn't help her. Probably still assuming I'd swoop in last minute. But I didn't. Because Amanda hadn't just skipped my birthday. She'd built a version of me in her mind that only existed to bail her out, her safety net, not her brother. She couldn't even say, "Happy birthday," but expected me to keep her dream car rolling. Nope, not anymore. That evening, I made one final change. I closed the joint account I'd opened for Mom a few years ago, the one I quietly refilled every month to keep things stable. It had started after Dad passed, and I knew the bills were stacking up. I never made it a big deal. I just slipped a few $100s in here and there. But it was never temporary. Because once people realize you won't let them sink, they stop swimming. I transferred the remaining balance, just under $1,400, into my personal account, then shut it down completely. No note. No heads up. Just done. Within an hour, my phone rang. It was Mom. I didn't pick up, but she left a voicemail. "Daniel, what are you doing? This isn't you. You don't do this. I don't understand why you're being so cruel. If this is about your birthday, we can fix it. I'll make it up to you. But this is overreacting. No, this wasn't about my birthday. This was about every birthday, every Christmas, every phone call that only came when someone needed a favor. Every time I was treated like an afterthought unless I was opening my wallet. It was about the way my family loved my resources more than they loved me. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to explain myself. The next few days were a blur of fallout. Amanda posted a vague rant on Instagram. Some people love to remind you what they've done for you. That's not love, it's control. Just commented with a heart emoji. And Linda shared a passive-aggressive meme about the real ones always stick around. My mom stayed quiet publicly, but she texted me every morning. First with pleading, then guilt, then silence. And then Friday night, something I hadn't expected. A long, handwritten letter arrived in my mailbox. Not typed, not emailed. Actual pen on paper. It was from my mom. It wasn't perfect. It didn't excuse everything, but it didn't deny it either. She said she hadn't realized how far things had gone, that she thought I was just strong enough to always handle the weight, that she had noticed all the things I'd done, she just didn't know how to say it. She ended it with, "You didn't deserve to be invisible. I'm sorry it took this to see it." And I sat there, letter in hand, for a long time. Because that one sentence, those 13 words, were the first real sign of accountability I'd seen in years. I didn't cry. I didn't call her. But I didn't throw the letter away either. I folded it gently and put it in a drawer. Some things, I realized, didn't need revenge or confrontation or grand declarations. Some things just needed closure. And I'd finally found mine. In the weeks that followed, things stayed quiet. Just stopped texting. Amanda sent one last "you message and fell off the map. Aunt Linda kept posting cryptic nonsense about loyalty and forgiveness, but I'd long since muted her. My mom? She didn't ask me to pay the mortgage again. She didn't bring up the money. She just started asking how I was. At first, it was awkward. Shallow questions about my work. But over time, it got better. She sent me a photo of the flowers blooming in her front yard. Asked what books I was reading. Even called me just to say goodnight one time. It wasn't a full repair. Not yet. But it was the first time in years I felt like a son, not a sponsor. I started sleeping better. Eating better. I joined a local writing group. Took a solo trip to Alaska. Laughed more. And the blog post? It kept spreading. One day, I got an email from a woman in Toronto who said she read it out loud to her therapist. Another from a guy in Texas who said he finally canceled his own family's financial leash. They weren't strangers anymore. They were proof. Proof that letting go of toxic family dynamics isn't heartless. It's healing. So here I am, months later, telling this story not because I want pity or applause, but because maybe, just maybe, someone reading this is where I was. Alone. Unseen. Tired of being the good one who always gets the worst treatment. And if that's you, let me say what no one said to me. You're allowed to stop showing up for people who never showed up for you. You're allowed to draw the line, even if they call you cruel. You're allowed to take your power back. Because you deserve more than crumbs. You deserve a seat at the table or the strength to walk away from it. And when you do, trust me, your silence will say everything they refuse to hear. I was 32 when I got married, and I thought I had finally reached that point in life where everything starts to click into place. My name's Connor, and for the better part of my 20s I'd been hustling, working long hours, living on instant noodles more often than I'd like to admit, and saving every penny I could. By the time I met Natalie, I had my own house, my career was steady, and for the first time in a long time, I actually felt proud of where I was. My parents had always been complicated. Growing up, they loved my brother and me, but their version of love often came with strings attached. They had this unspoken rule that I was supposed to be the responsible one. I was the one who moved back home during college to help out financially. I was the one who co-signed their second mortgage when they nearly lost the house. And I was the one who set up all their bills under my name because my credit score was higher than theirs. For years, I didn't complain. It just felt like part of my role in the family, until it didn't. When I proposed to Natalie, I expected my parents to be thrilled. Instead, the first thing my mom said was, "You sure she's the one? She doesn't really fit our family." I laughed it off at first. My mom had made snarky comments about every girl I'd ever dated, so I figured it was just her usual criticism. But over the next few months, it became clear that it wasn't just casual disapproval. She never used Natalie's name, just called her that girl. If we invited my parents over for dinner, they'd cancel last minute with excuses that barely made sense. "Oh, we forgot we promised to watch a movie tonight." Or, "Your dad's tired from work." Meanwhile, they never missed a single gathering with my cousins. I brushed it aside because I wanted to keep the peace. I kept telling myself, "It's just a wedding, they'll come around." Planning the wedding was stressful enough without the constant feeling that my own parents weren't excited. Natalie noticed it too, though she tried to be gracious about it. I spent months organizing everything, booking a venue, working with caterers, finding a band, and one of the biggest expenses was flying my parents out. They live across the country, and I didn't want them to have any excuse not to come. I paid $15,000 for their flights, hotel, and car rental for the entire week of the wedding. It was a big hit to my savings, but I figured it was worth it to have my family there. My brother RSVP'd yes right away, so I figured at least he'd be there. I imagined them sitting in the front row, watching me marry the love of my life. That vision is what kept me going through all the stress. 2 weeks before the wedding, I called my mom to go over some last-minute details, the rehearsal dinner time, what they might want to wear, where they'd be seated. She was quiet for a moment before saying, "Actually, Connor, we've been meaning to tell you. We won't be able to make it." At first, I thought I'd misheard. I laughed nervously and said, "What do you mean you can't make it? I already booked everything. The flights, the hotel." She cut me off. "Well, your Aunt Lisa is throwing a baby shower for your cousin that same weekend, and we just can't miss it. This is her first baby. You know how important that is." I was speechless. "You're skipping my wedding for a baby shower?" I asked, my voice shaking. My mom sighed like I was being unreasonable. "Connor, weddings are overrated. People get married all the time. A first baby only happens once." I hung up the phone and just sat there for a while, staring at nothing. I told Natalie what happened, and I could see her trying not to cry. She didn't want me to feel guilty, but I could tell it hurt her deeply. My dad texted me later that night, just 3 words, "Weddings are overrated," as if that was supposed to make me feel better. The next day, my mom followed up with another text, "We don't approve of her anyway." That one stung. They hadn't even tried to hide it anymore. It wasn't about scheduling, it wasn't about money. They just didn't want to be there because they didn't like the woman I chose to marry. I remember sitting in my office, my hands clenched into fists, thinking about every sacrifice I had made for them over the years. Every bill I paid, every time I bailed them out, every holiday I spent fixing things around their house instead of resting. And they couldn't give me one weekend. One single day. The day of the wedding came, and it was beautiful despite everything. Natalie looked stunning, the weather was perfect, and all of our friends showed up ready to celebrate. But there were 2 glaringly empty chairs in the front row, the ones meant for my mom and dad. During the reception, I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures of the empty seats, right there next to where my brother was sitting. Later that night, when everyone had gone home and we were lying in bed, I sent the pictures to my parents with a short message. "Here's your view from today." I stared at the screen, waiting for a reply. None came. Not that night, not the next day. They didn't even pretend to apologize. And that's when something inside me shifted. For years, I had been the safety net. I had been the one quietly keeping everything afloat. Their mortgage, their utilities, their phone plan, even their streaming subscriptions. And suddenly, I didn't feel like doing it anymore. I didn't feel like being the responsible one while they treated me like I was disposable. That night, I opened my laptop, logged into every account that had my name on it, and started shutting things down one by one. The mortgage auto payment? Canceled. The electricity bill? Removed my card. Their phone plan? Disconnected by morning. I didn't send a warning. I didn't explain. I just turned off the faucet that had been feeding them for years. By sunrise, my phone lit up with 37 missed calls. When my phone buzzed nonstop that morning, I didn't answer a single call. I just sat there with my coffee, scrolling through the list of missed calls. First mom, then dad, then my brother, then mom again, over and over. Finally, a string of texts started coming through. Connor, what happened to the house payment? Your dad just got a notice that the electric bill wasn't paid? What's going on? Answer me right now. This isn't funny. And then the one that made me put my phone face down on the table. If this is about the wedding, you're being childish. Grow up. I actually laughed. One of those humorless, exhausted laughs. Childish. After everything? I didn't reply. Instead, I closed my laptop and decided to give myself one day where I wouldn't have to think about them. Just one day where my life wasn't defined by whatever emergency they were creating. But the next few days, the calls didn't stop. In fact, they escalated. My brother texted me next, saying, "Mom's crying every night. Dad's threatening to sell the house if you don't put the payments back." That one was interesting because the house was still in my name, technically. Years ago, when they were behind on the mortgage, the bank wouldn't refinance under their credit, so I had stepped in and taken responsibility, which meant if they sold the house, I'd have to sign off on it. They weren't just asking for my help. They were trying to guilt me back into being their ATM. It would have been almost funny if it didn't hurt so much. I ignored them for a week. Natalie and I went on a short honeymoon nearby, just to breathe after the chaos of the wedding. I thought maybe they'd cool down if I gave them space, but instead, when we got back, I found a letter in my mailbox from my dad. Not a card, not an apology, just a 2-page list of everything they claimed they'd done for me over the years. We fed you. We clothed you. We gave you a roof over your head for 18 years. It read less like a heartfelt message and more like an invoice. At the bottom, my dad had scrawled, "The least you can do is take care of us now." I crumpled the letter into a ball and tossed it in the trash. When I told Natalie about it, she put her hand on mine and asked quietly, "Are you sure you want to keep doing this with them? You don't owe them your sanity." She was right, but a part of me still felt like I was betraying some invisible rule by cutting them off. That guilt is what made me pick up the phone the next time my mom called. Finally, she said the second I answered, her tone sharp, "You've put us in a horrible position, Connor. The internet got cut off. The lights almost got shut off yesterday. Do you realize how embarrassing this is? What will the neighbors think?" Not once did she say she was sorry for missing my wedding. Not once did she ask how Natalie was or if we were enjoying being newlyweds. I stayed quiet until she finally asked, "Well, are you going to fix this or not?" I said calmly, "No, I'm done fixing things for you." The line went silent for a few seconds, and then I heard her sharp intake of breath. "Excuse me." "You heard me," I said. "I spent $15,000 to bring you to my wedding, and you chose not to come. You called my marriage overrated. You told me you don't approve of my wife. And now you want me to keep paying for your life like nothing happened? No, not anymore." She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she went on the attack. "You're going to let us lose the house? After everything we did for you?" "You're not going to lose the house," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my chest felt tight. "You're just going to have to pay for it yourselves, like everyone else does." "You ungrateful little," she started, then cut herself off and hung up. I thought that would be the end of it. Maybe they'd get the message. But if anything, it made things worse. 2 days later, I came home from work to find my brother sitting on my porch, waiting for me. "We need to talk," he said as soon as I stepped out of my car. He looked uncomfortable, which wasn't like him. He was usually my parents' golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Inside, over coffee, he tried to play mediator. "Look, man, I know they messed up by missing the wedding. But this is too far. They're not used to handling the bills on their own. You know they can't afford everything." I crossed my arms. "And whose fault is that? I've been paying their bills for almost a decade. If they can't handle it, maybe it's time they figure out how." He sighed. "Mom said you're punishing them just because they didn't like Natalie." "She didn't just not like her," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "She disrespected her. She disrespected me. I gave them every chance to show up for me, and they chose not to." He rubbed his temples. "Fine, but you know they're talking about taking legal action, right? Dad says since the house is in your name, you have a responsibility." I cut him off. "They want to sue me? Go ahead. But if they think they can guilt me back into being their free bank, they're in for a surprise." My brother left soon after, clearly frustrated. And that was when I realized this wasn't going to just blow over. They weren't going to apologize. They weren't going to wake up one morning and decide to treat me with respect. They were going to double down until they got what they wanted. The next week, I started getting calls from other family members, my aunt, my cousin, even my grandmother. "Why are you letting your parents struggle like this?" they asked. "You know they don't have anyone else to help them." It was clear my mom had been busy spreading her version of the story. In her version, I wasn't the son who paid for her plane ticket and hotel room just to have her ghost me. I was the selfish son who abandoned his parents for no reason. One night, I got a text from my dad. "If you don't put the payments back on by Friday, we're done. Don't bother calling us again." I stared at the message, feeling that mix of anger and heartbreak rise in my throat. They were trying to turn this into an ultimatum. I didn't reply. Instead, I went upstairs, opened the filing cabinet where I kept all the mortgage paperwork, and started going through it line by line. If they wanted to make this a war, I needed to know exactly what my position was, legally, financially, everything. And that was when I noticed something I hadn't paid much attention to before. The mortgage balance was much lower than I realized. After years of making payments, the house was almost paid off. I sat back in my chair, an idea slowly forming in the back of my mind. For the first time since this whole mess started, I didn't just feel angry, I felt calm. Because now, I had leverage. And that's when things really started to escalate. A few days after I'd had that realization about the mortgage, I decided to stay quiet and watch what my parents would do next. If they were bluffing about taking legal action, I figured they'd either back down once they realized I wasn't budging, or they'd actually try something. And if they tried something, I wanted to see how far they'd go. The next Sunday, I was working in my home office when Natalie called out from the front porch. "Connor, you need to see this." I walked outside and froze. Sitting in my driveway was my parents' car, and standing beside it was my dad, red-faced and fuming, holding a stack of papers. My mom was sitting in the passenger seat, arms crossed like she was the wrong party here. My dad didn't even say hello. He just thrust the papers toward me and barked, "Sign these." I looked down. They were quitclaim deed papers. They wanted me to sign the house over to them. Fully, completely, no strings attached. I laughed, but not because it was funny. It was that hollow kind of laugh you do when you can't believe what you're seeing. "You drove all the way here to try and get me to give you the house." My dad's jaw tightened. "It's ours anyway. We paid for it until you took it over. You wouldn't even have a house of your own if it wasn't for us teaching you how to be responsible. Now stop acting like a spoiled brat and sign the papers." "Dad," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice level, "I saved your house from foreclosure. I paid for years on it. You wouldn't even have a house if it wasn't for me. And you want me to just hand it over because you decided my wedding wasn't worth attending." My mom rolled down the window and leaned out, her voice sharp. "You're holding it over our heads, Connor. That's not love. If you really love this family, you do this without making us beg." I stood there in the driveway for a long moment, holding the papers, my hands shaking. This wasn't just a request for help. This was them trying to rewrite the story, trying to make me the villain for finally standing up for myself. "I'm not signing anything," I said finally, and I handed the papers back to my dad. He didn't take them. He let them flutter to the ground between us, his eyes narrowing. "Then don't come crying to us when you're cut out of the will." That stung more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't that I needed their money. I was fine on my own. But the fact that they were willing to use something like that as a weapon against me made me realize just how conditional their love had always been. When I didn't respond, my dad stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think you're so smart, Connor, but we still have connections. Don't think we won't fight this." "Fight what?" I asked, incredulous. "Your own son? For a house I've been paying for? Go ahead. See how that looks to a judge." He glared at me for another moment, then turned and got back in the car. The tires squealed as they backed out of my driveway. I stood there for a while after they left, my chest tight, wondering if that was really the last straw. If we just crossed a line we couldn't come back from. I found out later that it wasn't the last straw. It was just the opening act. 2 days later, I got a call from my mortgage lender. "Hi, Mr. O'Connell," the rep said politely. "We've received a request from a third party to transfer the deed on your property. We just wanted to confirm that this is something you authorized." My stomach dropped. "No," I said immediately. "I didn't authorize anything like that." "Who requested it?" They couldn't tell me over the phone without a formal inquiry, but I didn't need to guess. I called my brother that night and asked him point blank if Mom and Dad had said anything about trying to take the house. There was a pause before he said quietly, They mentioned something about getting it put back in their name. Connor, what's going on? They're acting like you're trying to evict them. They're trying to steal the house out from under me, I said flatly. My brother whistled under his breath. Look, I know they're being dramatic, but I don't think. Save it, I said, cutting him off. If they think this is how they get me back under control, they're dead wrong. But as angry as I was, I still held off on doing anything drastic. I wanted to see what else they would do. And sure enough, they didn't disappoint. The following weekend, Natalie and I drove out to grab dinner. And when we came home, I noticed something was off. The side gate to my backyard was open. When I went around to check, I realized someone had gone through my trash. The bags had been ripped open, scattered across the grass. Inside, old bank statements and utility bills I'd shredded were lying in a soggy pile. Someone had been looking for information. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Natalie looked uneasy. Do you think it was them? I know it was them, I said. The next day, I installed security cameras around the house. If they wanted to play dirty, I was going to have proof of everything. And then came the final straw, the thing that turned this from just a family feud into something much deeper. A certified letter arrived in the mail, addressed to me. Inside was a formal notice. My parents had hired a lawyer and were petitioning for what they called reimbursement of funds expended on behalf of Connor O'Connell. In plain English, they were suing me for all expenses incurred raising me from birth to age 18. I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking so badly that I had to sit down. They were actually trying to bill me for being their child. Natalie came into the room and found me staring at the letter. What is it? She asked, and when I handed it to her, her face went pale. They can't be serious. Oh, they're serious, I said bitterly. Something inside me hardened in that moment. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about control. About them trying to prove they still had the power to make me dance when they pulled the strings. I stood up, grabbed the deed papers they'd dropped on my driveway, and fed them one by one into the shredder. The sound of the paper tearing was louder than I expected, and with every sheet that disappeared into the machine, I felt a little lighter. If they wanted a war, they had just declared it. And that was the moment I decided that I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to make sure they never had this kind of hold over me again. What I did next is what set everything in motion. After shredding those deed papers, I expected to feel liberated. And for about a day, I did. It was like I'd physically destroyed the weight they'd been holding over me. But then the fallout really began, and for a while, I wondered if I'd made a huge mistake. The first sign came that Monday morning. I was sitting at my desk at work when my phone lit up with a call from HR. Connor, can you come to my office? My stomach tightened. I hadn't done anything wrong, but that's never a fun way to start a conversation. When I walked in, my manager and HR rep were both sitting there, looking uncomfortable. We've received some concerning calls, the HR rep said carefully. Someone claiming to be your father reported that you've been committing financial fraud and using company resources for personal gain. I felt my blood run cold. That's not true, I said immediately. I've never. We figured as much, my manager said quickly. But you understand we still have to document this and look into it. I nodded numbly. Of course I understood. But that didn't stop the wave of humiliation that hit me as I walked back to my desk and saw my coworkers' curious glances. My own parents had tried to get me in trouble at work. That night, I sat on the couch staring at the wall for a long time, barely hearing Natalie as she tried to comfort me. I'd always thought the worst they could do was guilt-trip me, maybe yell at me, maybe disown me. But this was something else. This was them actively trying to ruin my life. And the hits kept coming. The very next day, I got a notice from the bank that someone had attempted to access my accounts. They'd entered the wrong password too many times, triggering a temporary lock. I had to spend half the day on the phone with the bank getting everything reset and adding extra security. When I finally got back into my account, I saw that someone had also tried to set up an auto payment using my information to pay their utility bill. They're getting desperate, Natalie said softly when I told her. They're getting dangerous, I corrected. For the next couple of weeks, it felt like I was living under siege. Every time my phone buzzed, my chest tightened. One day it was a message from a relative saying, "Your mom says you're leaving them homeless." Is that true? The next day, it was a certified letter from their lawyer, this time threatening to put a lien on my house, the one I owned outright, if I didn't resume the mortgage payments on theirs. I stopped sleeping well. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., my mind spinning through worst-case scenarios. What if they actually succeeded in ruining my job? What if they convinced the court to force me to keep paying? What if this never ended? Natalie tried to stay strong for me, but I could tell it was wearing on her too. One night, we were sitting at the kitchen table, a pile of legal papers spread out in front of us, and she said quietly, "I feel like we can't even enjoy being married right now. It's like they've turned this whole first year into a battlefield." I hated that she was right. This was supposed to be the happiest season of our lives, and instead it felt like we were constantly on the defensive. And then came the breaking point, the moment that finally pushed me all the way down to rock bottom. I was at work when my brother called. I almost didn't pick up, but something in me hoped he might finally be calling to apologize, to say he'd talked some sense into them. Instead, his first words were, "You should know Mom and Dad are moving in with Aunt Lisa for now. They said you left them no choice." "Good," I said flatly. But he didn't stop. "They also said they're going to start selling your stuff from the garage to cover the bills until you come to your senses." I felt my stomach drop. "What?" "They still have a key," he reminded me. I was in my car and driving home before he'd even finished the sentence. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw the garage door was already halfway open. Inside, my dad was standing there with one of my toolboxes in his hands, and a stranger, someone from the neighborhood, I guessed, was standing next to him with cash in hand. "What are you doing?" I shouted as I jumped out of the car. My dad had the audacity to look offended. "Trying to keep the lights on, Connor. Since you won't help." I walked straight past him, grabbed the toolbox, and yanked it out of his hands. "Get out. Right now. Don't talk to me like that," he barked. "Get out." My voice was shaking with anger. He dropped the box on the floor and stormed past me, muttering under his breath. The buyer backed away slowly, clearly uncomfortable, and left without another word. When they were gone, I locked the garage, then the front door, then every other door in the house. Then I went upstairs and found the spare key they had and snapped it in half with a pair of pliers. And then I sat on the kitchen floor and cried. I hadn't cried like that in years, not since I was a kid. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was grief. Grief for the family I thought I had. Grief for the idea that if I just worked hard enough and gave enough, they would finally see me as worthy. That night, after I'd calmed down, I sat with Natalie on the couch and said, "I can't keep living like this. If I don't do something, this will never end." "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. "I mean, it's time to stop reacting to them and start thinking long term. If they want a war, then fine. But I'm not going to fight it on their terms anymore." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "So what's the plan?" I didn't have all the details yet. But as I sat there, staring at the legal papers on the table and the broken key in the trash, I started to picture it. This wasn't just about cutting them off anymore. This was about making sure they could never do this to me again. The first step was going to hurt, but it was necessary. I was going to legally separate myself from every tie I still had to them. No more shared accounts, no more co-ownership, no more leverage for them to use. And once that was done, well, I had some ideas about what might come next. But first, I had to dig myself out of the hole they'd shoved me into. The very next morning, I woke up with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in months. The fear was still there, the pit in my stomach every time I thought about my parents and their threats, but now it was mixed with something else, determination. If I was going to get my life back, I couldn't just sit around waiting for their next move. I started small. I called the mortgage lender first, explaining the entire situation calmly and professionally. I sent them copies of the quitclaim papers my parents had dropped off, the threatening letters, and the notice from their lawyer. The woman on the other end of the line was sympathetic. "Mr. O'Connell," she said, "you are the sole responsible party on this mortgage. No one else has the right to transfer or control this property without your consent. If anyone tries, you are within your rights to challenge it." That gave me my first breath of relief in weeks. Legally, I was still in control, but I knew that wasn't enough. I didn't just want to be reactive. I wanted to make it impossible for them to pull this kind of stunt ever again. So I hired my own lawyer. Sitting across from her in her office felt surreal, like I was finally putting up a shield after years of standing bare-chested in front of arrows. I laid everything out. The bills I'd been paying, the mortgage arrangement, the harassment, the attempts to take over the deed, even the false report to my company. She listened carefully, occasionally jotting notes, and when I was done, she said, "Connor, you have more power here than you realize. If you want to cut ties financially, we can do that. If you want to send a cease and desist letter to stop the harassment, we can do that too. And if you want to go one step further and protect yourself legally, we can restructure everything so there is nothing they can claim in the future. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt my chest loosen. There was a way out. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and meetings. My lawyer helped me move the mortgage into a legal trust under my name, something that gave me full control but removed my parents from the equation completely. We drafted letters formally severing me from responsibility for their utilities and debts, with copies sent to every creditor to ensure nothing could come back to me. And we filed a formal response to their lawyer's ridiculous reimbursement petition, including documentation of every dollar I had spent keeping them afloat for the last 10 years. It wasn't just about protecting myself legally. It was about reclaiming my mental space. And with every step, I felt stronger. Meanwhile, my career was taking off. My company completed its investigation into the bogus fraud accusations my parents had made and not only cleared me completely, but actually promoted me 2 months later. "We were impressed with how you handled that situation," my manager said. "You stayed calm and professional, even under unfair pressure. That kind of composure is leadership material." The promotion came with a hefty raise and a bonus that made my jaw drop when I saw the number. I walked out of that meeting with a grin that wouldn't leave my face. It was as if the universe was saying, "See, you don't need them. You never did." With the raise, I started building up savings again, but this time, for me and Natalie. We paid off her student loans, renovated the guest bedroom into an office, and even booked a second honeymoon, one that was longer and somewhere far away from all the drama. And something else started happening too. My relationship with Natalie got stronger. Without my parents' constant interference hanging over us, we were able to just breathe. We had slow Saturday mornings making pancakes together, nights curled up watching movies without my phone buzzing with another crisis, and conversations about the future that actually felt exciting instead of terrifying. Of course, my parents didn't go quietly. They kept trying to guilt-trip me through relatives, but I stopped responding. My lawyer handled all communication with them now, which meant I no longer had to see the venom they were spitting my way. When my mom sent a long, tearful email about how I was killing the family, I didn't even open it. I just forwarded it to my lawyer and went back to my work presentation. And as the noise died down, something strange happened. I started to feel free. Free from the constant need to please. Free from the fear of being cut out of their will or being disowned. Free from the belief that I was responsible for everyone else's happiness. That freedom gave me space to think bigger. I started volunteering for projects at work that scared me, big, challenging ones that put me in front of executives. I started networking with colleagues in other departments. I even joined a mentorship program, helping younger employees navigate their careers. And slowly, I began to realize that I wasn't just surviving this storm, I was thriving. One day, I came home from work and found Natalie sitting at the kitchen counter with a mischievous smile. "What?" I asked, grinning despite myself. She slid an envelope toward me. Inside was a set of travel documents, flights, and hotel bookings. "Surprise. I booked us a trip to Italy. We leave in 3 weeks." I blinked at her. "You did this without telling me. You've been working so hard," she said softly. "You deserve a break." "We both do. Besides, it's time to start making happy memories again, don't you think?" I smiled, really smiled, for what felt like the first time in a long time. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I think it is." That night, as we ate dinner, I caught myself thinking about the empty chairs at my wedding again. But this time, I didn't feel pain. I felt gratitude. Because those empty chairs had shown me who my parents really were and who I needed to become. By the time we left for Italy, I wasn't the same man who had sat crying on the kitchen floor a few months earlier. I was stronger, more focused, and far less willing to tolerate disrespect in my life. But there was still one thing left unresolved, one last step I needed to take to truly put this behind me. And as fate would have it, an opportunity was about to drop into my lap that would allow me to take that step and change everything forever. Because while I had been quietly building my life back up, my parents had been doing the exact opposite. And soon, I would have the chance to show them, once and for all, that the days of me being their safety net were over. And this time, they wouldn't just hear it, they would feel it. The turning point came one Friday afternoon, months after I'd finally put my legal and financial house in order. I was sitting in my office, wrapping up some work before heading home, when I got a call from an old friend of mine, Daniel, who worked at a regional real estate firm. "Connor," he said after the usual greetings, "you're never going to believe who I just saw in my office." I raised an eyebrow. "You know I hate guessing games." He chuckled. "Your parents. They were here trying to get a home equity line of credit approved, but here's the thing. They don't have the income or the credit to qualify. The only reason they even still have that house is because you've been paying the mortgage. And apparently, the bank already flagged them for missed payments since you cut them off." I felt my jaw tighten. "So what happened?" "Well," he said carefully, "they left pretty upset. But they also left a big folder behind, with their financial documents in it. Pay stubs, debt records, even some letters they've been writing to other relatives about you." I skimmed one. "Connor, they've been telling people that you abandoned them, that you owe them for everything they spent raising you, that you're trying to force them out of the house so you can sell it and keep the money." My stomach twisted. "Are you saying they're spreading that to the whole family?" "Worse," he said, his tone suddenly serious. "They've been talking to people about getting you blacklisted at work. They said they were going to find a way to ruin your reputation so you'd come crawling back." I sat back in my chair, my hands gripping the armrests so tightly they hurt. It was one thing to threaten me directly, but to actively try to destroy my career and my relationships? That was crossing a line I couldn't ignore. "Do me a favor," I said finally. "Hold on to those documents. I'll come by and pick them up." When I showed up at Daniel's office later that day, he handed me a thick folder. Inside was everything: their bank statements, letters to other relatives, copies of emails they'd sent trying to get credit lines approved, and, most interestingly, overdue notices from multiple creditors. They were in way more trouble financially than I'd even realized. That night, I spread everything out on the kitchen table. Natalie sat across from me, her expression a mix of sympathy and quiet anger as she read through the letters. "This is bad," she said finally, setting one down. "They're not just lying about you. They're trying to rewrite history so they can play the victims." "I know," I said quietly. "So what are you going to do?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I kept flipping through the documents until I found what I was looking for. A letter from the mortgage company warning that they were officially 3 months behind and foreclosure proceedings would begin if payment wasn't received by the end of the next billing cycle. And that's when it hit me, the thing I hadn't let myself think about before. If I paid off the balance, the house would be mine outright. It already legally was, but this would close the door completely on any claims they might try to make. But I didn't just want to save the house. I wanted to use it as leverage, as the final statement that I was done being manipulated. "I'm going to pay off the mortgage," I said finally. Natalie blinked. "I thought you said you didn't want to keep supporting them." "I don't," I said, a slow smile forming. "That's the point. Once the house is paid off, it's mine. Legally, indisputably mine. And then they can either pay me rent like normal tenants, or they can leave. No more pretending it's theirs. No more strings." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "That's actually brilliant." It wasn't easy pulling together the money. Even with my raise and bonus, it was a big chunk of my savings. But I ran the numbers and realized I could do it without jeopardizing our future plans. And so, over the next 2 weeks, I worked with my lawyer and the mortgage company to arrange a full payoff. When the final confirmation came through that the mortgage was settled, I just sat there staring at the document. For nearly a decade, that house had been the invisible chain they used to keep me in line. Now, it was no longer a burden, it was a tool. But I wasn't done. My lawyer suggested that, since my parents were still technically living in the property, I formalized the arrangement with a rental agreement. "This way," she explained, "if they refuse to pay or continue to harass you, you have grounds to evict them legally. You're not just the dutiful son anymore, you're the landlord." I signed the paperwork that same afternoon. And as if the universe wanted to add one more layer to my new position of strength, an opportunity came up at work that made my power even more concrete. A leadership program that trained employees for director-level roles. My manager nominated me personally. "You've proven you can handle pressure," she said. "This is the next step." It felt like every piece was falling into place at once. I wasn't just regaining control of my life. I was stepping into a position where I could no longer be held hostage by anyone else's decisions. But before I made my next move, I wanted to be absolutely sure I had everything lined up. So I kept quiet for another month, letting my parents dig themselves deeper. And sure enough, they did. They sent another round of threatening messages, telling me they were considering taking the house back by force. I didn't reply, but I saved every single message. By the time the lease agreement was finalized, the security cameras were in place, and my lawyer had prepared the formal notice. I was ready. One night, after dinner, I sat with Natalie and slid the finalized paperwork across the table. "It's time," I said simply. Her eyes widened as she read the letter. "You're really doing it?" "Yes," I said, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. They wanted to treat this like a war. Fine. But now, I make the rules. And with that, we picked a date to deliver the news, a date that, by pure coincidence, lined up with my parents' annual summer barbecue, the one where the entire extended family would be present. If they wanted an audience for their performance, I was going to give them one. But this time, I would be the one holding the microphone. And the moment they heard what I had to say, I knew everything would change. The day of the barbecue arrived hot and sunny, the kind of summer afternoon where the air feels heavy and smells of charcoal from a dozen grills around the neighborhood. I hadn't been to one of my parents' gatherings in over a year, and driving up to their house felt surreal. But as I pulled into the familiar driveway, my driveway, legally speaking, I didn't feel dread. I felt calm. Natalie squeezed my hand from the passenger seat. "You ready for this?" she asked softly. I smiled, not the forced kind I'd worn so many times before, but a real, steady smile. I've never been more ready. We walked into the backyard, where the whole family was already gathered. My parents were near the grill, my mom wearing that fixed, polite smile she always put on when she was performing for an audience. My dad glanced up and froze when he saw me. I could see the flicker of annoyance cross his face before he schooled it back into something neutral. Well, he said loudly enough for half the yard to hear. Look who finally decided to show his face. There were a few murmurs from the relatives who hadn't seen me since before the wedding. I could feel their eyes on me, curious, expectant. My mom wiped her hands on a towel and came over, her smile tight. "Connor," she said, "you could have warned us you were coming. We would have." "I'm not here for the food," I said evenly. Her smile faltered. "Actually," I continued, projecting my voice just enough for everyone to hear, "I'm here to make an announcement. Since it seems the family grapevine has been busy, I thought it would be best to clear things up all at once." A hush fell over the group. Even the kids stopped chasing each other and looked toward us. I pulled a folded document from my pocket and held it up. As of last month, this house is officially paid off. Completely, legally, in full. And since the mortgage was always under my name, that means this house is now mine outright. My dad's face went red. "You can't just..." "Yes, I can," I said calmly. "And I have." I handed the document to my brother, who had been hovering nearby looking uncomfortable. He scanned it, his eyes widening slightly, and then nodded. "He's not lying," he muttered, passing it back. I turned back to my parents. "Now, because I'm not heartless, I've given you two choices. Option 1, you sign this lease agreement and start paying fair market rent starting next month. Option 2, you move out within 60 days. Your choice." The silence that followed was so thick you could have heard a pin drop. My mom's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to form words, but couldn't decide which ones would sting the most. "Finally," she managed, "you'd really evict your own parents?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let anger creep in. I just said, I'd really stop letting myself be manipulated. This house has been used to control me for nearly 10 years. That ends now. My dad barked out a bitter laugh. "You think you're so clever. What will the family think when they see what you're doing?" I looked around the yard, meeting the eyes of each aunt, uncle, and cousin watching. "I think they'll understand when they see the full picture." I pulled out my phone, connected it to the small Bluetooth speaker I'd brought with me, and hit play. The audio that filled the yard was from a voicemail my parents had left me 2 months ago, one where my mom had screamed that I was a disgrace, and my dad had threatened to take the house back by force if I didn't start paying again. I let it play in full, standing silently as the color drained from my mom's face. When it ended, I said simply, "This is what I've been dealing with. I have spent tens of thousands of dollars keeping this house from being foreclosed. I paid their bills for years. I even flew them across the country for my wedding, only to have them skip it for a baby shower. And still, they tried to take me to court to make me pay more. If any of you think I'm being unreasonable, now you know the whole story." For a long moment, Nobody said anything. Then my Aunt Lisa, the one who had hosted the baby shower they skipped my wedding for, cleared her throat. "I didn't know it was like that," she said quietly. "They told us you just abandoned them." "They lied," I said. Murmurs rippled through the group. I saw my cousin, the one whose baby shower they'd prioritized, frown and shake her head. "That's messed up," she muttered. My mom's composure cracked. "You're humiliating us in front of everyone." "No," I said gently but firmly. "You did that yourselves. I'm just done covering for you." With that, I pulled the lease agreement from my pocket and set it on the patio table. "You have until the end of the month to sign this. If you don't, my lawyer will begin formal eviction proceedings. Either way, this is no longer your house to hold over me." Then I turned and walked out, Natalie's hand in mine, leaving them standing there in stunned silence. We didn't say a word until we got back in the car. Then Natalie let out a long, shaky breath. That was intense. "It needed to be," I said, my voice steady. And as we drove away, I felt something deep inside me settle, like I had finally put down a weight I'd been carrying for far too long. But the fallout from that day was just beginning, because my parents weren't used to losing, and the way they reacted next would make it clear that, for them, this wasn't just about a house. It was about control, and I was about to show them that they no longer had any. The fallout began before Natalie and I even made it home. My phone started buzzing with text after text, first from my mom, then my dad, then even my brother. "How dare you do that in front of everyone? You've embarrassed this family for the last time. You can't actually go through with this." I didn't reply to a single one. My lawyer had told me to let all communication go through her from this point forward, so I simply forwarded everything to her inbox and went about my evening. Natalie and I ordered pizza, opened a bottle of wine, and put on a movie, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel my chest tighten every time my phone lit up. 2 days later, my lawyer sent the formal notice. Either my parents signed the lease agreement by the date listed, or eviction proceedings would begin. There was no room left for debate, no loopholes they could exploit. The power was entirely in my hands now, and I could tell they hated it. The calls from relatives started again. Aunt Lisa called first, trying to smooth things over. "Connor, maybe this has all gone a little too far," she said carefully. "Your mom is devastated. Can't you just forgive them and put this behind you?" I stayed calm. Forgiveness doesn't mean putting myself back in a situation where I'm constantly manipulated. I've made my decision. When she tried to argue, I said gently but firmly, "Lisa, you weren't there when they left that voicemail. You weren't there when they tried to sell my things to strangers. This is what it took for them to take me seriously." She went quiet after that, and I think that was the moment the tide began to turn. Word spread quickly through the family, and this time, it wasn't my parents controlling the narrative. My cousins started texting me privately, saying things like, "Good for you, man. I can't believe they tried to take the house," and honestly, someone had to stand up to them eventually. As the support rolled in, my parents' attempts to save face became more and more desperate. They sent out a mass email to the family claiming that I was kicking them out onto the street and abandoning my blood, but no one seemed to buy it anymore. Then came the deadline day. My lawyer and I waited at her office for the signed lease agreement to come in, but nothing arrived. Instead, she got an email from my parents' attorney saying they refused to sign and considered my actions a betrayal. "Then we moved forward," I said simply. And so we did. The eviction process wasn't immediate. It took a few weeks of hearings and paperwork, but because everything had been set up legally and carefully, it was smooth. My lawyer presented the mountain of documentation we'd gathered, proof of payments I'd made for nearly a decade, records of their harassment, even security footage of my dad trying to sell my belongings. The judge didn't take long to rule in my favor. My parents were given 30 days to vacate. The day the order came down, my mom sent me one last message. "You've destroyed this family. I hope you're happy." And for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt relief. When the move-out day came, I showed up with my lawyer and a locksmith. My parents were still there, sulking in the living room. They didn't say a word to me as the movers carried out the last of their boxes. When the house was finally empty, the locksmith changed every lock. Standing there in the quiet afterward, I felt an overwhelming wave of peace. I walked through the house slowly, room by room, letting it sink in that this was finally over. No more late-night calls about unpaid bills. No more threats. No more guilt hanging over my head like a storm cloud. Natalie joined me in the kitchen, slipping her hand into mine. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. I looked around at the house, my house, and smiled. Like I can breathe again. Over the next few months, we renovated. Fresh paint, new furniture, a backyard garden. We turned what had once been a source of stress into a place that finally felt like home. As for my parents, they moved in with a distant cousin 2 towns over. Word was they were still complaining to anyone who would listen about how ungrateful I was. But by then, no one was listening. Even my brother, who had once been their staunchest defender, called me one evening and said quietly, "You were right. They were never going to stop. I think you did the only thing you could." That call meant more to me than I could say. The next time we hosted a family gathering, the empty chairs at the table weren't painful reminders anymore. They were symbols of a boundary that had been set, once and for all. And as I looked around at my friends, my cousins, and Natalie laughing beside me, I realized something important. I hadn't just saved myself from their control. I'd saved the life I was building from being swallowed by their chaos. When everyone had gone home that night, I stepped out onto the porch, looked at the quiet street, and felt that calm settle over me once again. "They said I'd regret this," I murmured to Natalie. She leaned against me, smiling softly. "Do you?" I looked back at the house that was finally, completely mine, and shook my head. "No," I said. "I think this is the first decision in my life I'll never regret." And for the first time since that wedding day, I knew with absolute certainty I was free.